God bless everybody today. It is June 5th of 2023. Tomorrow is D-Day, so in remembrance of that time in history. And it also brings me to this teaching that I'm doing tonight. I believe that the world is getting ready to make a seismic shift, and things are going to start to accelerate rapidly. In this video, in this teaching, I'm going to try to lay out all my teachings culminated into this one teaching and show you how all my charts and stuff interconnect, show you how this chart here, which is the 117 step timeline that I produced, actually completed it on my Adobe Illustrator on my birthday on October 9th of 2019, and that day Erdogan invaded Syria. So I think that's pretty significant, at least in my world it is. So I was at that time, I had a lot of things going on in my personal life. My mother had deteriorated through dementia, so I was basically in a basement on my birthday. My family was 3 hours north of me, so I couldn't really do much. I was bound to that home, and so I was working on this chart, and I finished it on my birthday. And I've documented these things through my videos, and so but I did not realize until the next day that Erdogan had invaded Syria on that very specific date of October 9th of 2019. So Erdogan had started this operation on October 9th of 2019 when I produced this chart, and from that time forward, I believe we watched everything break down. And on my paradigm, I show you how a lot of these events like COVID and stuff came out right after this time. And so I'm going to try to meld together multiple charts and show you what I believe will be coming up in the next 1,580 days. And I know that's very specific, but there's a very specific reason why I'm stating that, and I'll explain that as we move through the charts. So let's go into these charts and I'll show you what I mean by this. So the first thing I want to explain is these are going to be somewhat longer videos, and so just realize there's a lot of information here, and I'm going to lay this out so that it's very detailed. And I'm terrible about detail, but I believe that that's extremely important so that we can show you the verses, get you to understand at least my understanding of the last 50 years, and especially in the last 6. I started producing these videos about 60 years ago when I realized that I believed Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39 was the white horseman, and that was Erdogan of Turkey. And I've been producing videos about this since, and you can see them on my YouTube page at James Boltemeyer, or they're on a lot of them are on my eschatology site. I have not posted all of them on here, and I'm very bad about doing that. So it's best to find those links at the bottom of the video, and you can see those things. Now, I'm not trying to promote my videos or my sites or anything like that. That's not what this is about. This is about getting the information to you, and I'm going to give you the information so you can go out and actually look at it yourself and determine whether there's any validity to this at all. Now, one of the things that I've done on this chart, if you go to eschatology at endofdayssurvival.com and you go down the page, you're going to see these PDFs. So I've added an additional one here, which is the file that we're going to work through in this study so that I can show you how all these charts are melded together and they make a complete story for you. So the main charts that I want to basically look at though are the 117 step timeline, which basically takes you from the very beginning of Revelation 117 steps through the whole book to the very end. It gives you verses attached to each of the steps. You can follow directly in your Bible in those steps. I use the Revised Standard Version, or it's probably because of this study and because those are the things that I am using, the King James Version would be probably the easiest to follow because a lot of the verses are pulled directly from those Bibles, and so it's just easier to follow, and they mesh really well together, at least they have for me. And so that's the two Bibles I use that, and I indicate that in this file at the end here. But this file here is the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. It goes through all the kingdoms of the Jews, how we get to where we are today. This is a breakdown of all the different kingdoms that Daniel talks about and how it conglomerates into a beast kingdom at the end. This file here, though, is the paradigm, and it's how basically, I probably should indicate that's the paradigm, but this paradigm and this chart here now have been melded into a text file here, and so I want to show you how that works. So if you click on this first file here, it will bring up my first chart that I'm going to show you. Now this chart is too large to print out, and the only one that you probably can print out is this because it's a PDF text file, and so you can print out the pages. But this file here is about 10 foot by 4 foot, so when you print it out it's like a banner, and so you can't print it out on your normal systems, and so that's why I produce them out here on a PDF so you can enlarge and see them up close. But I'm sorry you can't print them out. I have to have them specially printed if I do a hard copy of any of these. But I did allow you, because the files are getting so large now that I can't get them to work together because there's too much information and they're getting too large. You know, you're talking about a 10 by 4 foot banner here with very detailed information, so they're getting extremely detailed, and so I placed everything into a text file here. So if you click on this file, it brings you to this chart. So this is the original chart that I produced. And what I've done is I've taken these chapters and I've broken out John's 3 additional visions. I'm not going to go into great detail about this because I've done many studies about this. And this is extremely, if you have not followed any of my other videos, you're probably going to get lost and you need to go back and watch a lot of the other videos. I will try to explain this the best I can so that everyone can understand what I'm talking about, but it will help you to have some of those videos so you can understand better what I'm explaining now. So what it is this. I realize that when you look at the last 3 trumpets, they reoccur in multiple different chapters. And so that if you cut out the 3 different visions that John has while he's in heaven, because he has 3 additional visions, and I've talked about this in other videos. One of the elect, one of the nations and peoples, and one of Mystery Babylon, that if you remove those 8 chapters and you read chapter 1 to 6, basically 8 to 10, 15 to 16, and 20 to 22, it makes it makes a complete story, and I build a 117 step timeline out of that complete story based on these chapters, and you'll see how that works. But you also have these sub-chapters, or what I call sub-chapters, because what they do is they run down into these additional visions. John is removed. He's in heaven. He's having additional visions while he's in heaven, and he has these visions of what's going to happen on the ground to certain groups or sections of people or places. And so if you look at how I laid this out, you'll realize that each of these 117 steps have a verse attached to them. So I want to use the same PDF as you're going to use, so that way you can follow me easier through the video. If you pull up this file or you print it off, you should be able to follow. You can't print these off, but you can print off the last one on the 5th file. So if you bring this up, you'll realize that what I've done is each step has an attached verse to it. And I just basically pulled the verse somewhat right out of the Bible without trying to change it too much, but I had to lay it out on here so you could see it. But I gave you the verses so you could see where the verses come from. And you can also see that certain events are happening above that, so you can see that there's events occurring throughout the whole timeline to the end. And it goes all the way down. And each of these has an attached verse. You can see that. And you can follow them in your Bible if you follow this structure that I've given you here of how to follow these chapters properly, and then add or layer in the additional 3 visions later to add depth to the story. And so I think that's extremely important. So I just want you to realize, and I'll blow these up just a little more so you can see, each of these steps, like the first step, the angel from Jesus gives John a vision. You come down here, gives you the vision, it tells you the verse, and then he has the letters. He writes the 7 churches, the letters, and those give you those verses, and then you just keep moving down the line, okay? So by the time you get to the end of this story, it completes the story, because you get to all the way to the end of here, and it gives you Revelation 22, last verse. And so you can just follow this through. You have to remove those 3 additional visions so it completely allows you to see the whole story first. Then you layer in the additional visions, or the other 3 visions that John has, and that gives you a complete story. Now, it's extremely important that in Revelation 8:13 that we look at that warning. I've talked about that many times. He talks about the last 3 woes and why. The 5th trumpet is when the bottomless pit opens. The 6th trumpet is when the false prophet and the Antichrist rise. And the 7th trumpet is when the Lord Jesus comes back. And he also, I allude to, you need to sort of watch those 42 months or 1260 days or 3.5 years. I allude to those in these stars down here. Those stars are indicated in multiple places on these charts so that you can cross-reference this. Now, I was going to place this melded paradigm with the 117 steps, but it's too big to put in this chart. It's already pretty packed with information. I am going to re-update this before long, but I couldn't get it on there, so I had just made a text file of the 2 melded together. So this chart and the other chart that I've been showing you for quite a while are going to be melded together in this study. So the second chart that we're melding together with this chart is the 4th chart. Now these are all about the statues of Daniel in 2, 7, and 8. So we don't, that's a totally different, it adds to the value of this, and I'm going to address these things, but the 2 main charts we're looking at are this chart, and I'm melding this into a text chart here. And so if you click this chart on, it takes you to this next chart that I'm going to show you. Now please have patience with me on this because I'm trying to show you how these things all work together, and hopefully I'm not confusing you, and I prayed to the Lord that He gives me the proper words out here to show you what I'm talking about. So on this paradigm chart, or that fourth chart, if you click on that, you're going to come here. Now this is the paradigm of the three kings. This is where I found that three kings of today reflect three kings of the past, and I believe that we will see a almost exact same event from the past happen in the future as we move forward in the next 1580 days, as I'll show you based on this chart and this date from here, okay, which is October 17th of 2027. Now, I'm not going to get into these charts too much, and that's what I mean. You need to go back and watch the other charts. We were talking about these 2300 days of Daniel and how he is tabernacling with us and we are with the Lord, and so we count that back. I bring us back to June 30th of 2021. Now, I indicated in this chart that I believe a chain of events occurred on October 9th of 2019 when the White Horseman Erdogan invaded Syria and started what I call the beginning of the sorrows and the birth pains that would take us into the War of Daniel 8, which is coming up potentially in the next few months. So what I want to show you is if you go from this, now I'm going to try to show you, or I'm overlaying this chart into the other chart so you can see where they connect, where you can see these things work together. So if you take this chart and you overlay it on the other chart, you're basically going from the first seal here, okay, because this was back in the past when John had the vision, so now we're in the future, we're in the first seal. That takes you all the way down through the bowls, and I talk about the bowls at the end of that paradigm, and then we go into the millennial. And so you want to look at the gap between basically the fifth step and the 48th step, 49th step over here, as you or even to the 50th step, and then we walk into that millennial time of Satan being bound for the 1,000 years. So when you go to the other chart, we are starting from that first seal, and we are walking through the 7 bowls into the millennial phase. And so that way you can see how these charts sort of work together. So the next chart we're going to look at is this chart, because this is the text file that basically lays out those two charts back to back, and they work hand in hand together. And so I want to give you that chart. Now this is going to take some time for me to walk through it, but realize that it works perfectly with the other two charts. And so I wanted to lay this out on a text file so you could actually print it off, go look at all the verses and documentation and everything that I've produced, and make up your own mind on whether or not this is a valid concept, and how all this things work together, and how I can't believe all this is just coincidence. And there's just too many things that seem to work hand in hand together, and I'll sort of try to explain how that happens. So if you click on this last file, I will get into this what I call sort of the melding or the combined chart of the 117 step calendar and the paradigm of the modern day three kings, that will show you what I believe is coming up in the next 1580 days, or about 4 years and 5 months to the Feast of Trumpets of 27. And I've shown you where that lands on the paradigm chart. So I know this is going to be a long video, and hopefully I haven't lost most of you already. There's a few of you I know that have been waiting for this video, and so hopefully I can explain it in the proper manner and do it in a fairly quick fashion. But yet I don't want to leave a lot of detail out, because I think to me it's very profound, and the information is extreme, and there's a lot of it here, and so I don't want to shortchange any of this. And I may even go into multiple videos to do this, because I don't want to drag these out too long. So we'll see how this goes as I walk through it. I'm not going to set a timestamp on how long it's going to take to do this video, or how many different sections I'm going to break it into, because I don't know how long it's going to take to make it. So let's start this, and we'll go from step to step. Now realize these steps follow the 117 step timeline in that main chart. So you're following the steps in this 117 step timeline. And like I said, each of them give you a verse, and you're going to see the same thing in this text file. So we're going to start the beginning of Revelation, and we're going to walk through this, and I'm going to show you how that paradigm overlays over the top of this. Now, if you don't know where I found the paradigm, then you need to go find the video about the short version on the paradigm. It's about an hour long, and that will then explain to you how I found this, I believe, a prophecy that shows that 3 kings of the past reflect 3 kings of the future, and I show in great detail in one video, up to, it's almost 3 hours long, how all these connections are produced and how I believe they're going to affect us today. But in this video, we're going to show you just how the 117 step chart and the paradigm, along with all the statue charts and everything that I produce over time, work hand in hand together. So let's start in on this. We're already 22 minutes in. I'm very sorry for that, but I had to set these videos up so that they make some sense. So in Revelation, John has this vision, and we're going to walk through each and every one of the steps so you can see how this occurs, and it will give you as complete a picture as I believe has been presented to the population on what's coming up and how this is going to be laid out. And it's all based on verse, and I'm documenting them in this video and on these steps so that you can see where they're found throughout the Bible. So I use the Revised Standard Version Bible 1952, or the King James Version, which is what I referred to in the study. A lot of the verses are taken from the King James Version, so I just figured it'd be easier for you to follow that specific Bible. So in this first step, if you go to the chart, you come back here, the angel sent, an angel is sent from Jesus to visit John, and you can see the verses that are here. Now I'm not going to go over a lot of the verses, because this would take forever if I did that. I'm showing you the verses. You can print them off, and you can go out and look for them yourself. The steps of the 117 steps are pulled directly from the Bible in chronological order, and so I can't change them. It's one thing, and that's why in that main chart I haven't changed anything but the text file, because you can't change the 117 steps. They're all in the Bible in chronological order, and you'll see that as we're moving through here. And so I can't change the Bible, at least unless you use a different Bible that might have a different interpretation. That's why I use these very specific ones. So I'm not going to go over the verses, but there's going to be a lot of verses that produce where I found this information and why they are attached to these steps. And there's probably many more that I haven't found. I'm looking for people to help me add content to this discussion. So if you have content, please allow me to know what that content is, and I'll look at it and see if I can add it to this. Because this isn't just about me coming up with or me coming up with an idea. That's not even a good way to say it. He giving me these images and ideas and concepts, and then I'm trying to produce them to you. That's not just for me, it's for everyone. And so everyone should be involved in trying to understand this picture and come up with the right truth, so we can then give that to the churches and to the masses, and so that they can have truth in the middle of madness and chaos out here. So the first step is the angel is sent from Jesus to visit John. And in the second step, John writes to the churches in Turkey, Asia Minor. All 7 churches are found in Asia Minor, and so we keep coming back to Turkey. Turkey's going to be big in my world, as well as Jerusalem is a main epicenter of God's world. So he writes to these 7 churches, and Jesus' angel warns that these are the shortcomings, or what they're doing right or wrong, what they need to do to change their ways. And he sends these letters out. And then I put the special note because I believe, if you follow anything that I do, that Pergamus, Turkey is Mystery Babylon. And this is important. I did a main study about this, where the seed of the beast or seed of Satan is in Pergamum, and that he has this special judgment against this church or Antichrist seat or his bride. Excuse me. Now, when I say Antichrist bride, and I've said this wrong in the past, because Satan is thrown down, and then he controls the Antichrist and false prophet. When he's thrown from heaven, he impregnates and controls these two. He's not Antichrist. Antichrist and the false prophet are on the ground, controlled by Satan. And so if you think about Jesus and his bride, it's Jerusalem. And who's his father? God. Well, Satan is the father of Antichrist, and who would his bride be? That would be the seed of Satan, or the beast, which is Antichrist, which would be his bride, which would be Pergamus. And I think I built a fairly strong case to show that Pergamus, Turkey, potentially would be a very plausible place for Mystery Babylon to be. It also radiates out of Turkey, and if you're talking about something close to Antichrist as he's being exalted on the Temple Mount, or in Israel, you would have to have something fairly close to Israel, or within conjunction of that area. So John is taken to heaven. In the third step, John is taken to heaven and shown a vision of things to come. Now, these are latter-day visions that he has after this moment. And it also states that only John is taken. I cannot verify, and I do not believe that when you see those elders or whatever in heaven, that is the church or the body of Christ. It does not indicate that in any way, shape, or form. It only indicates that John is removed at that time. And I also don't believe that there is, I don't believe that we're taken up at this moment, and that if you go through this paradigm and timeline, that you realize that we are removed on the 7th trumpet, as I've indicated many times. And so if you're into pre-tribulation rapture, you're probably going to leave at this moment. But if you don't leave, you might actually learn something. So stick around, and I'll try to show you what I mean by that. And it does explain this. If you want to sit and watch this, it will show you when that does occur. But it's going to take some time to get there, because we go through a lot here. Jesus' Lamb is chosen in the 4th step to open the 7 seals on the scroll and he's given to him by God. Gives you the verses there. And then I want to get into this white horseman, or this first seal in the 1st step. Now, I've indicated in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that the bow and the arrow are knocked out of his hand, and so this was an indication in my vision or my image that I had, that the white horseman wasn't either a history lesson, Antichrist, or Jesus. He was actually Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39, and that he would be the first seal, and he would be destroyed on the sixth seal. He would be buried, resurrected, and then brought forth when the bottomless pit opens on the fifth trumpet, and Antichrist rises on the sixth trumpet. So this player here is a very specific player. Now, the other three horsemen that follow him, because we have 4 horses and then the martyrs that come out on the fifth seal, I can't account for whether they're specific people or anything, but they do bring all these different plagues upon the world. And so when this horseman here is unleashed, he brings these next 3 horsemen with him. And so let's walk through that and show you what happens there. So if Erdogan is the white horseman, and I will show you why he's not Antichrist or Jesus as we move forward, and why those 2 events happen in the trumpet phase, that this would be the Neo or New Ottoman Empire rising after 100 years from its destruction in 1923 in World War I. Now, I believe, based on my studies, that Erdogan of Turkey is the white horseman or the first seal rider in Revelation 6:1 and 2, verse 1 and 2. Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, is also Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39, which will lead 10 nations that attack Israel by October of 2023. And that is a very specific date, I know that, but I've shown you on the paradigm why that date, especially October 10th of 23 and October 25th, and that gap could be an extremely important event called the sixth seal. And so this is extremely important. Erdogan's vision is a list of goals released by the Turkish administration in 2010 and 2011 to coincide with the Centurion, or I'm going to be terrible on my dyslexia, so I'll just work with me on some of these words. But the 100th year of its demise, the Ottoman Empire was destroyed in 1923 in World War I, and he wants to rebuild this Neo-Ottoman, new Ottoman Empire by the end of 23. And now that he's been elected for a new 5-year term, he has that ability to do so. And I believe he will, because his economy, his lira, and the Turkish system basically is collapsing at this very moment. So usually when you get into this type of collapse, they tend to go to war. And he's had these different incursions over the line of Syria and Iraq that we'll get into shortly, that I believe is a prophecy that's going to take place in the next few months. The 3 horsemen, the red, black, green, or pale, will follow this white horseman as Erdogan moves to attack Israel by October 23. And so once he invades, and I believe he's already started that, in that potential problem, because if you go back into that paradigm chart and you look at these dates, something extremely important happened. Right after he came out on October 9th of 2019 and invaded Syria, the COVID started to we had reports from the Chinese provinces that COVID had broken out, and by the end of that year, it was a full-blown epidemic in the world. So by December 31st of 2019, first day of 2020, we saw the world was under a global pandemic at that moment. And so was this the release of the start of the sorrows and birth pains, and this COVID was the start of the breaking of the next 3 seals, which are famine, disease, economic destruction, death, and plagues. So if he was released on October 9th of 2019, and he started to bring forth these different plagues, the world started to become unrest, pieces taken away from the earth, famine and that world economic evil starts to hit the world. And this fourth seal is that pale or green horse. And I think it's interesting that between these first four horses, a quarter of the world is affected, or 2 billion people are basically under duress by either sword, hunger, death, and beasts of the wild, as well as the rest of the world, because this ripples out throughout the whole world. But I also think it's extremely interesting that death is followed by Hades and hell here, as indicated in Revelation 6:7. And that on the fourth seal, the bottomless pit is already moving, I believe, following Erdogan to his destruction on the sixth seal by the wrath of the Lamb in 6:16. That we would actually see him buried there, and then that would then start that next phase of the trumpets. And if you follow my teachings, I indicate that Gog, or this leader of Turkey, which at this moment is Erdogan, now that he's been elected, so I have to look at the leader there, and that he would die, be buried, and this pit would then open up on the fifth trumpet, and a being would come out of this hole as Satan is being thrown down, and he would resurrect this being directly out of this hole called the bottomless pit, or this abyss. And so if you look at how this is laid out, it's extremely important on these charts that as we follow them through, I'm showing you on text how they relate to the files on those charts. So based on the paradigm of the three modern day kings I've produced and shown you, these chain events started on, I believe, October 9th of 2019 when Turkey invaded Syria. Now this operation is called Claw Sword, Operation Claw Sword, and so I believe he will invade in the near future now that he's become the new leader of Turkey, and he will start to genocide those Kurds down towards Iran, and then those two countries will align as Daniel 8 indicates, and I will show you that as we move forward. So he started this invasion. It was later named Operation Claw Sword. This would be the start, I believe, of the birth pains and sorrows. This led to the outbreak of COVID and led to most of what I believe has happened up to today, and this is just going to increase and get worse because they are the birth pains and sorrows as we move forward in the next 1,580 days. The first reports of COVID started coming out in China in this providence in mid-October. I indicated that if he was released on October 9th, that would make sense because then he's releasing the other four horsemen. I'm not sure they're riders or physical people, but they're events and they tell us what they do, and so we have to watch these events up here and how they're going to affect us along with the white horsemen as we move through this time ahead in the next few months and the next 4.5 years. So we had this first reported case of COVID, reported case, you can go document it, in December of 2019, and by the end of that, by the beginning of 2020 and January 1st, we saw it was a global pandemic, and the World Health Organization came out and indicated that. And the disease is still a problem today. It's never really gone away. It mutates, migrates, and changes. And so this is something that is not going away and probably will not go away until this story is complete. We had this warning to Israel that I did a video on that I thought was extremely important, where they came out just shortly after this in September of 19th and 20th of 2020 during the Feast of Trumpet and Rosh Hashanah. The shofar is blown on the Sabbath. The old rabbis, and for some reason I thought this was an extremely bad idea. I did 3 videos, and that this was a warning to Israel and Judah that the king of the north, or Turkey, would be unleashed on them in the near future, as indicated in Jeremiah 4, 5, and 9. So, as we walk through this chart, I'm going to give you dates because we're walking through dates that are leading up to today and as we move forward. And so it falls that when you look at these charts that I'm showing you here, they have dates on them, okay? And they're the dates that follow these charts. And so you need to understand what you're looking at and why these dates are here and how they line up with this chart. And that this chart overlays on the 117 step chart between the first seal and the last bowl, okay? So when you get into moving towards today and where we are now, what has happened? So on June 30th of 2021, I believe this is when we had the start of the 2300 days based on this chart here. I talk about those 2300 days, how they start from the Feast of Tabernacles, the last day. We would be tabernacling with God. This is the last fall feast before the end of the strong generation, or the 80th year, which would end in May 14th of 2028. And so all things would happen prior to that. So if you go to that fall feast, because he completed the spring feast when he was here and was crucified and died for us, he's going to fulfill the fall feast as the Jewish people indicate. He will, and he will to the letter. We should look at this, and we should then take the last day of the fall feast and the Feast of Tabernacles, move that 2300 days forward. That then takes us to June 30th, and at that moment we started to see this get really bad, okay? And it's been getting bad ever since. So if we go back to this chart, what has happened? Well, we had that start of the 2300 days, and potentially I talk about the 3 woes and 3 trumps and how that all works together, okay? And how that warning in Daniel indicates. And, you know, it was because of this warning that from this one verse, I created this chart. Because I knew that if you cut out these reoccurring 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpet that were constantly recurring through these sub-chapters, but can only occur once up here, that if you remove those and you found out exactly where those 3 trumpets occur, which I've shown you in this top chart, that you would then understand how this warning affects these 2300 days as we move through this chart. Okay? Because I show you where those trumpets occur in this chart also. So we had the start on September 7th of 21. We had the start of the sabbatical year, and then on the start of that same day, we had the start, or that last year of the Shemitah, which I thought was extremely important. Every time we have a Shemitah year, we have a breakdown of the system fairly shortly after that, and this was a recurring theme throughout history. You had that fall equinox on the 22nd. September 25th, you had Rosh Hashanah, begins the Feast of Trumpets. We had the end of the 7th year of the Shemitah and the sabbatical year, all on the same dates. Rosh Hashanah ends. You had Yom Kippur. And then you have the Feast of Tabernacles. And look at that again. October 9th, I can't get away from the October 9th thing. It just seems like it reoccurs a lot. And I'm going to show you another date later that's sort of interesting, to me at least. I don't know if they mean anything, and I'm not special. I'm just saying it happens on my birthday a lot. I'm in the fall feast, and so it's just probably something that's randomly happens quite a bit. But to finish the chart on the 9th, to have Erdogan invade on the 9th, to have all these different events on the 9th, we're going to move forward. There's a few more dates coming up that are going to be extremely interesting here. So once we get past this, we start working into this paradigm that I talked about and that I'm going to get into here. So I realized that I had seen a pattern forming between all the prophets, that they were all saying the same thing, that if we took the dates of these kings that they were talking about, of this day, of this year, of this king, they reflected dates of, or they reflected kings of the past or reflected kings of today. I showed you who those kings are in that paradigm, and I'm going to show you that as we move forward, because they're going to be named here as we move forward, and I'm not going to go into that. But I realized if you look at Daniel and all these prophets, they're going to give you a timeline, and they're going to give you a breakdown of events that will take you into the next 4.5 years or 1,580 days as indicated on my charts. So we're going to start in this paradigm, and this is the part of the meld, because up to this point I've only been working off of this chart. Then I added the paradigm, or these portions, these portions of the chart onto that chart, which then gives you this information here. Because if you go here, you're down into about this area right here, okay? And we're starting into this Daniel 8 war that's coming up between Turkey, Iran, and the Kurds. So in this prophecy, we saw something radically happen, or a massive change in Israel. So on January 3rd, 2023, Daniel was distressed for 3 weeks. Now this is based on my paradigm, based on the king that's in place at that moment and the time that Daniel tells us based on this verse. He indicates that he has a vision on this date, and he can't eat for 21 days prior to the vision, and so that's how this date comes out. But if you look at that date that he gives us in these verses here, he talks about the first month, the 24th day, okay? And that we would see an event happen as we move forward. Now, it reflects today, or January of this year, because what happened, we had the National Security Minister visit the Al-Mosque compound, and he draw international combination, and this started a chain of events between Hamas, Hezbollah, and all these groups that are starting to build up now, because they're proxy with Iran, and so we're starting to see this build up, and this is all sort of started from this chain of event of this person visiting the site, and it's been breaking down ever since. And so 21 days later, Daniel sees this vision of this war that's going to happen between, or that's going to happen to Iran. In this vision, Daniel was told that Iran, Persia would be attacked by Israel first, then the Prince of Grecia, the leader of Turkey, would come next against Iran and Persia, because Israel doesn't finish the job. And if you go into all those different prophecies of Daniel 8 and 10, Isaiah 28 to 38, and Jeremiah 26 to 45, and those are chapters on all those books, the same event occurs. What happens? Israel is under duress from the Assyrian, or in this case, Iran. And what do? They recruit the Babylonian, or Turkey in this case. Back in the day it was Iraq, but today it's Turkey. They also recruit the Egyptians, and what happens? Jeremiah says this shouldn't happen because, well, this is going to end up badly. You should have relied on God and not these other groups. And so what will happen is you will fail. The Babylonian will destroy the Assyrian, and then he'll come and destroy you. And so we need to watch these prophecies and how they play out. And they play out exactly the same in the past as they are in the future. And so I've talked about this Daniel 8 prophecy and how Turkey, or the Babylonian, will attack the Kurds and Persia or Iran, and that he will start the first Magog war by the summer months of 2023. And so what would happen prior to that? Daniel's having this vision. He's seeing this vision of duress. He knows that he's been told that Israel is going to attack first, but then, and Michael is going to be sent against Iran. But then after that, we would see the prince of Greece come after that, which is the leader of Turkey. And if you follow the history of the Jews and the how the kingdoms broke down, you realize that when the Roman Empire fell and everything was moved from Greece and that area over there, it was moved to Constantinople, Turkey, and then was divided up in that area there in Asia Minor. And so he's talking about this very specific area in Turkey. Now, I've indicated that Joel 1 would happen first before Gog, the sword, happens, because God always does it the same way. He attacks by locusts, plagues, and famine first. He attacks by the sword, and then he has this remnant removed of the people that are true believers in God, and he has a salvation of these remnant of people, either hides them or does something with them. So the start of Daniel 8 prophecy, the Ram Goat War, Turkey's war against the Kurds and the Medes, and Iran and Persia, I believe will start in the next few months. I've talked about this. Daniel 8 states that once the Medes and the Kurds line or are forced to align with Iran and Persia, we would see the king or the prince of Grecia or Turkey destroy both these nations. And you can see these different verses that indicate that this could potentially happen this way. So this is extremely important, and based on my paradigm, it indicates that this war should start or occur between that January 3rd indication up here and October 10th of 2023 as we move forward in this paradigm. And so you want to be able to look at these dates. And that would then end in a 6 seal event in October 23, which would be a global event called the 6 seal. Probably between June and September 23 is when this attack would happen on Iran, because Israel has to be attacked by October based on the paradigm. Now, this is only based on the paradigm, and if this timeline falls apart, then I'm probably wrong. I'll be the first one to admit I'm wrong. I'm just showing you that we seem to be in this chain of events and we keep moving forward. And so this time between January and October of this year are extremely important to me to see how this plays out as we move forward. The other thing I will say about Daniel 8 is this is my confirmation on whether this is really starting to play out in front of me, because at this point I'm not sure. If Turkey invades and starts to genocide the Kurds down to where they align with Iran, then probably Daniel 8 is actually happening in front of us, and we can sort of see where we are in time. But that hasn't happened yet. And so I can't just say, well, I know Daniel 8 is going to happen, because I don't. I'm not sure yet. It looks to me like Erdogan's getting ready to invade. He has everything set up to, and he is positioned to destroy Iran if he does. And so would he? Would he force these Kurds to basically be genocided to a point where they had to align with Iran? And then would that frustrate or make Erdogan or the leader of Turkey so mad that he would then go and destroy both these nations, and then that would then start us into the beginning of the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war, which I call the Seals War, or the war between Daniel 8 and Ezekiel 38 and 39. We're talking about the Seals Wars, okay, between 1 and 6, Seals 1 and Seals 6. So is Erdogan getting ready to invade? Is he going to invade fairly soon? I truly believe he will. I believe he'll leave NATO. Everything that we heard about in Turkey lately is about the Kurds. Why they won't let Sweden and Finland join NATO because of the Kurds. We've had this killing of this young woman in Turkey that was a Kurdish woman that sent shockwaves through and demonstrations throughout the whole region. We've had destruction of bombs in Istanbul. We've had effigies in burnt and displayed in Sweden, and the Quran burnt, and different things like that. And so will Erdogan stay in NATO? I don't believe so. I believe that he will leave NATO. I believe that will be fairly soon. I don't believe that they fit in his ideology, and I believe since he wants to rebuild that Neo-Ottoman Empire by the end of 2023, as he stated for so many years, that he's an ideologue just like Putin is, and as Putin is going to rebuild his old Soviet footprint, Erdogan is going to rebuild his new Ottoman Empire footprint in the Middle East. And so once Iran falls and both these nations are destroyed, that would then complete Daniel 8. Okay? Now, if you go to Ezekiel 38 and 39, you'll indicate that Iran is one of the first countries absorbed into this 10 nations that end up in Israel and go to war against them and die on the 6th seal, if Erdogan is the first seal. Those 10 nations would attack Israel in the future, near future, next few months, potentially within the next 6 months, and all of those 10 nations will be destroyed by the wrath of the Lamb or Jesus the Son on the 6th seal in Revelation 6:16. Once Persia, Iran falls, it would be then absorbed into Turkey. And so this is one of the nations that joins Turkey and is absorbed by its destruction up here into these 10 nations that will end up in Israel in the next, I believe, 6 months for this attack in October of 23 by 10 nations of radical Muslims. But first, Iran has to fall. They will end up in Egypt because they'll drive across that area, and then they'll be pulled back up to the two seas and attack Israel and Jerusalem shortly after that. And I will show you how that happens in the near future as we move through here. Events based on the paradigm timestamp start of the Seals War, Seals 1 through 6. And this is what I mean. So now I'm going to take you through the paradigm and how this works with this information up here. And so the paradigm is going to be spread throughout this teaching. And that's why I wanted to be able to have you all printed out, and then you can sit down and read this stuff because it may be confusing as we're walking through this. So we started to have some of this paradigm up here. This turns into a prophecy. We move down through this prophecy. It starts to turn into the paradigm again. That's just going to keep continuing as we move forward. And so as we move through this paradigm, you have these dates here, and I produce them down here so that you can see them. You have him sickened. He has a vision on the 24th. We have all this stuff start to happen to Israel. Things start moving forward. By October 10th of 2023, it indicates, based on the paradigm, that we would see Erdogan besieging Jerusalem. And that is based on multiple prophets. Okay? Not just one, multiple prophets. I showed you where these verses are. They say the exact same thing. Now, I use Joel 2 because this is the attack of Gog on Israel and Jerusalem. But these 3 verses say exactly the same thing. Now, in the paradigm, we start getting into these modern 3-day kings and how they're going to be affected. These kings are Reuben Revlin, which is the prior king or leader of Israel, the newest leader of Israel, which is Isaac Herzog, and Erdogan of Turkey. And if you look at my paradigm, they reflect 3 kings as we move forward. And I've explained who those kings are. I won't do that here. You'll sort of pick up, hopefully, as we move forward. So these dates between January and October are extremely important. They're extremely important because if this war with Iran is getting ready to occur, we start this breakdown of Israel in January, and then by October, Iran has fallen and Israel is being attacked by 10 full nations of Muslims. This is going to break down fairly quickly. We'll see as we move forward whether this really happens or not. And you know, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm just showing you there is a paradigm here that could potentially tell us what is coming. And I've written it down so you can see it and follow it. It may or may not come true. We will find out in the next 6 months, 5-6 months. So Daniel says, in Daniel 20:10, after he has this vision, he says he knows where he has come for thee unto thee, and now he will fight with the prince of Persia. And so Michael, he's talking about Michael in this verse, is going to go against the against Iran. He's going to go against Persia, and then the prince of Greece will come later. And so that's what I'm saying is Israel will not complete the job. They say they think they're going to be able to handle anything, but they won't, and no country is going to come to their aid, and so they're going to be left out there. And in the same process, they're going to be devastated by Turkey before this process is over. So once the Medes and the Kurds are destroyed, Daniel 8 completes, and we start moving into Ezekiel 38 and 39. And so when the 6th seal destruction occurs on, I believe, the 25th of October, and I'll show you how that happens here in a second. So Erdogan is starting to besiege Jerusalem on the 10th, based on these verses, based on the kings of this month, of this day, of this king, this event happens. That on this same day, Erdogan will give the 10 horned nations authority for 1 hour, which is 15 days on earth. If you take 1,000 years of God, or 1,000 years of ours, of 1 day of God, you break that down, 1 hour of God is 15 days of ours. Okay? He'll attack Israel, and he will be destroyed on the 6th seal. So 15 days after the 10th would take you to the 25th. But something else happens here based on the paradigm, based on the prophets. Isaac Herzog, the 11th president of Israel since the forming of that nation in May 14th of 48, is captured and taken away to Babylon or Turkey. Antichrist will place the last leader into position as we move forward. I'm going to show you how this works. This gets really interesting as this paradigm moves forward. So Isaac Herzog is captured, and Israel is under siege at this moment. So they're not going to have an election, okay? They're going to rely on who? The other president that was just prior to him, Reuben Revlin. They will bring him up. And then they'll rely on Netanyahu and all these other players. But because Isaac Herzog will be captured on this date, he will become an ineffective leader that's imprisoned for up to almost 3 years based on this verse, and that he will somehow escape and then war or rebel against Antichrist in 2026 and 2027, the start of 2027 or the end of 2026, based on the paradigm. Now, it tells us this, that he's captured and that he's going to do prison time for up to almost 3 years before he escapes, and then we're into Antichrist's phase, okay? So when he's released, Antichrist is already on the ground. He's not on the ground yet. Antichrist hasn't come out yet. Gog is on the ground. The first seal's still here, that white horseman. But if he attacks and besieges Jerusalem on the 10th of October, and 15 days later, God or Jesus drops the 6th seal on them and destroys all these nations with a global earthquake, stars falling from heaven, and all these things on the 6th seal, we're going to see this destruction of Gog and these 10 nations by the wrath of the Lamb or Jesus, which is not the same as the wrath of God, which happens in Revelation 15:1, which are the 7 bowls, or the wrath of God. It tells you clearly in Revelation 15:1 and 2 that that is the wrath of God, and that he would hand out the 7 bowls at that moment, and those angels would go forth and drop them, and that we're not appointed for that wrath. So if Erdogan is destroyed on the 6th seal by the wrath of Jesus while he's besieging Jerusalem, this would then destroy the new Ottoman Empire, the Neo-Ottoman Empire, and those 10 nations, and Gog of Ezekiel, or Ezekiel 38 and 39. That prominent horn or leader, Erdogan, would die, be broken, as it indicates in Daniel 8. Once Iran falls, the prominent horn is also broken. That prominent horse comes from Turkey. That is the leader of Turkey. And so what would happen is the prominent horn of Daniel would die, would be broken, and what then would happen? We would see a resurrection of Antichrist and the rise of a little horn next, and the beast kingdom. Isn't that interesting how that happens? He destroys this individual here to make way for an Antichrist out of a hole in the ground to come forth as a little horn after the destruction of the prominent horn in Daniel, to then bring forth the beast kingdom. That's a really interesting way that he sets that up, at least in my world. Now, in this next area here, I want to show you something extremely important. How these kingdoms occur to the beast kingdom in the time and history of the Jews. Because you have to use what the Bible gives you. You can't use much beyond that. And that's why I stay with the Bible, and I stay with the history of the Jews, and I stay within the Jewish lineage of the time of the Egyptians through today to make my cases, because I believe that you can't go beyond that. You have to use these very specific things that he gives us within the Bible to make our cases out here and show truth to the population through verse where these things are found. And so when you get to these 7 heads and 10 horn crowned nations, there's a process that leads to the beast kingdom. And in Revelation 17:11, a very important thing is indicated here. The beast that was and now is not is himself an 8th king. And so we need to look at the kingdoms of the Jews and how they've had 7 kingdoms up to this point that have controlled them, and that once that Ottoman Empire or 7th kingdom would perish, we would then have an 8th king come out called Antichrist. And it's interesting that he, or this 8th king, belongs to the other 7 and is going into destruction. And so he is a conglomeration of these 7 kingdoms prior. Mainly, though, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th kingdom, which I'll show you how those connections as we move forward, because that is the footprint of not only Alexander the Great, but the Ottoman Empire. And so if you go back in history and you look at these kingdoms and their footprints, they all make the Ottoman Empire's footprint of the future, or back in World War I, and that will be the same footprint that Erdogan will rebuild in the future as we move forward into 23. And so if you look at this statue and you look at Daniel 2, 7, and 8, he morphs these beasts for a reason so that you can understand, and I've shown you those charts, how these kingdoms are formed. So if you go to these 2 charts on my page, that will take you into this breakdown of his statue. And so I'll pop these up real quick so you can just see them. I just want to show you what they're about. So in this first statue, it takes you through the kingdoms of the Jews and how Daniel was here, and he talks about Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold, how these next 3 kingdoms were going to form, how they reflect certain beasts in Daniel 2, 7, and 8. And everybody wants, and this is a good example. In the bear, he has one size raised up with 3 ribs in his mouth. Well, what is the one size raised up over the other side? The Medo-Persians. That talks about the same thing of the goat, where he has one horn that's higher than the other. He's alluding to this kingdom here. And so we need to watch these kingdoms, because if all these kingdoms are the ones that Daniel is talking about, they will end up being the footprint of the beast kingdom as we move forward down here. And so you can see that on my secondary chart. And so if you click on this chart, and I know it takes a second to produce this, it will go through all 12 chapters of Daniel, how these kingdoms form, how the chapters of Daniel reflect the beasts that move forward, that show the footprint of the beast kingdom come forward, and how that beast kingdom will form from these regions of the past into the future. And so this is part of the concept that I've been trying to bring to you, is that he's already told you everything that you need to know in this book. You don't need to use outside sources much. You need to look at what he's telling you in this book and use it, because he's telling you everything you need here, if you just know how to follow the story properly. So these are the same kingdoms as the statue and what Daniel was talking about. It goes through the whole history of the Jews and how that's important. Now, I will stress here, you do not see communist nations like Russia in this area or grouping, because I do not believe, yes, they will play a factor, but they are not Gog, and they will not play a main factor as they're bogged down in Ukraine, and he's trying to rebuild a new Soviet footprint. Why Putin cares about the Middle East other than oil, and that's the only reason he's there, in my opinion. So and look at this transition. So if the 7th kingdom, and you got to go back and look at this warning here. So the 8th kingdom is the beast kingdom, okay? That means that the 7th kingdom, which was the Ottoman Empire, which they thought was destroyed in World War I, isn't destroyed. That there's no other kingdom between the 7th and the 8th kingdom, which is the beast kingdom, and that we would see the rise of the Ottoman Empire again in the future. And that it's never really died, and Erdogan has been trying to keep it alive. And it's interesting, that if Erdogan is that leader Gog, that if he dies and he's buried in Ham and Gog after the sixth seal event, that this would be the fatal wound that has healed, because he will then be resurrected into an antichrist out of the bottomless pit on the sixth trumpet, or the abyss, as it indicates in Isaiah 14:11 through 20 and Revelation 3:13-3, that this is not a normal person. This is an antichrist resurrection. As Satan's being thrown down on the fifth trumpet, he's going to resurrect this being, this dead Gog, out of a grave. He's going to then have a short period of time of 1260 days. He's going to sign a treaty with the nations, and then we're going to see abomination 1260 days shortly after that. So this fatal wound will be healed, because he will be resurrected. Erdogan Gog, this dead Gog, will be brought to life out of a bottomless pit into Antichrist, as Satan is being thrown from heaven on the fifth trumpet, as the bottomless pit opens, and the Antichrist and the false prophet rise on the sixth trumpet, and the Lord Jesus comes back on the seventh trumpet, as I will show you as we move forward in the timeline and the paradigm. Now, at this moment, if the sixth seal does destroy these 10 nations, all of them die in general. There is only a residue of these groups left, and that plays a very important role as we move forward. This fatal wound will be healed, because this Antichrist will be resurrected from this dead Gog out of a grave called Ham and Gog, out of the abyss called the bottomless pit, that Michael is standing on as he's bringing Satan from heaven to earth. And if you go to that Revelation 8:13 warning, and that angel tells you on that fifth trumpet, woe to the earth, because he's throwing Satan from heaven forever to the earth. He will never be in heaven again, and then the earth will have to deal with him for the short period of time of the 1260 days. But something extremely important here in the way he has set this up. He's telling you that this eighth kingdom will come out of all these main kingdoms here. This is a conglomeration of this footprint, especially the third, fourth, and fifth kingdom. But it will then radiate out of the Ottoman Empire, or the seventh kingdom, and from this destruction will come an eighth kingdom as we move forward. This fatal wound will be then healed as a resurrection of a dead Gog into Antichrist, as the bottomless pit opens. Michael is standing on it, and Satan is thrown to the ground from heaven forever. The Ottoman Empire will be completely destroyed, finalizing the seventh kingdom to make way for the eighth and last kingdom, or the beast kingdom. Daniel 7:24 states something extremely important. I point this out all the time, and people overlook specific words and how they're laid out, because they're laid out very specifically for us to understand and to look at. Daniel 24 states something extremely important, and that's what I mean. Daniel 7 starts talking about end time prophecy. And so when you get into 8, you're talking about end time prophecy, not history. In 24, verse 24 of Daniel 7, he states something extremely important, very profound, something that we really need to dive into and study here. He states that these kingdoms, these 10 kingdoms, these 10 nations of Muslims will rise first. Then another kingdom will rise after them. What do you mean after them? What does that mean? They don't exist anymore. They're destroyed. And then a new diverse kingdom, the beast kingdom, will rise from this. And he will subdue 3 other kingdoms or nations. And so if you go back in the time of history, Alexander the Great is the perfect example here. If you go back in history and look at Alexander the Great, he took over this huge area, same area of the Ottoman Empire. And when he failed and he died at an early age, what happened? It fragmented, broke into a residue that formed into 4 regions that were controlled by 4 generals. At least that's what the history books indicate. Now, some people say differently, but if you go out and look at the main narrative, that's how it happened. And if you look at the history books in general, that is exactly what has happened. And so these 4 regions pop up. And so what happens? 10 kingdoms happen first. And then they perish. Then Antichrist rises as this residue turns into 4 regions, and he overthrows 3 of those regions. So they go from 10 to 4 to 1. Do you see how that works? The 10 nations are destroyed first. A residue rises of 4 kingdoms. One, a beast kingdom that overthrows the other 3 kingdoms. Or this 4th kingdom overthrows 3 kingdoms that turns into a beast kingdom, I guess is a better way to say that. So I'm sorry if I confused you. So 10 kingdoms melt down into 4 kingdoms. This kingdom, or one of the kingdom, probably the Seleucid kingdom, or in that area of Turkey, comes forth, overthrows the other 3 kingdoms from the residue of the 10, and that then all turns into a beast kingdom. Now, I've stated in the paradigm that 10 nations perish first. This is the Ottoman Empire that was supposedly destroyed in World War I, that really never went away, that will come back in the near future through Erdogan of Turkey, be rebuilt. It'll be a 10-nation caliphate against the Jews and Christians. They will be destroyed on the 6th seal because Erdogan is the white horseman. That will then turn into a residue that forms into 4 regional nations, and that would then be the destruction of the prominent horn, or the horn of Daniel 8, because Turkey is also destroyed, or that goat with the large horn is broken. And then what happens? The little horn or Antichrist comes forth after this resurrection of Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39, destruction of that prominent horn. This changes into the rising of a little horn or Antichrist and an overthrow of 3 of the 4 nations that have formed from the residue of the 10 nations that attack Israel and were destroyed on the 6th seal in Revelation 6:16. So if I'm reiterating a few things here, I think it's important that we understand these very, very specific, profound verses that he's giving us, and why when he indicates that 10 nations occur and then after them something else happens, we need to understand what he means by that. And so when this leader of Turkey dies on the 6th seal by the wrath of the Lamb, that prominent horn is destroyed. And Antichrist, or the little horn, will come up after that through these 4 new kingdoms or regions that form from the residue of the 10 nations of Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39, or that footprint of the old Ottoman Empire. Because it'll include all that area, the same footprint as Alexander the Great. But one nation or one of these 4 regions will come forward, probably from Turkey or the Seleucid area, like I said, and it's the same area as Alexander the Great, so that would then take you back to the statues and all that Daniel was talking about, and how those footprints of that statue were going to affect the Jews as they were moving forward. That diversified kingdom comes from these 3 kingdoms from above. If you look at that statue, you've got the gold head, which is the lion. Iran would be the bear. Same thing. As you move forward, I'm going to show you that in here in a second. You got the lion or Iraq. Iran is the bear. Leopard is Turkey. And in the past, you had the head of gold was Iraq. The breasts and shoulders of silver were Iran or Persia. And the Medes. I should have put the Medes there. And the belly and thighs of bronze were Turkey or the leopard. Okay. So if you go into the past kingdoms, I show you these three kingdoms here. And who are they today? Well, Saddam Hussein was that king of Iraq of today that matches this kingdom of the past. This kingdom will be the next to fall. That is the Medo-Persians. That is the Iranians and the Medes. And then what do you have? That last country, which is the bronze waist of thigh, the waist of the belly and the thighs of bronze would be Turkey. And so when you go back and you look at these kingdoms, they matter from past to future because he's showing us that the footprint of these areas are going to affect us not only in the past, but as we move forward. And that once these kingdoms are overthrown, that this area would be the quarter of the world that he encompasses in the beast kingdom that comes up in the future, potentially by the year 24 or 25, 2024 and 2025 as I walk you forward here. So they're reflecting past to future kingdoms. That's sort of what I'm trying to get across here. And so we need to watch why he's doing that to us and why he's showing you all these different things so that we make these connections and we can sort of see how this is going to evolve. But Daniel 8 to me is the most important thing that we should be watching is these Kurds and how Turkey's going to affect them as we move forward in the next few months. So this next section goes into sort of how this forms, and then we're going to walk back into some of the paradigm and the timeline. But I have to set this up so you guys can see how this is going to be laid out and what God's telling us and what to look forward. What to look for here as we move forward in the future. If you can see the roadmap, then you'll know how to walk through the landmine a whole lot easier as we move forward. Erdogan, Gog, moves through the Middle East, including the countries of Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Jordan, Sudan, Libya, and all the Middle East countries, basically ends up in Egypt by the end of 23, prior to being pulled back by a hook in the mouth in Ezekiel 38, 4, and 6 to a position between the two seas, which are the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, in Israel for an attack on Jerusalem and Israel. But if you look at Ezekiel 38, 4 through 6, I want to point out something extremely important. So again, I'm going to say Rosh is not here. To me, in my opinion, that is a mistranslation of Hebrew from chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, which are found in Turkey. This is the leader of Turkey. This is Gog, which is the leader of this land. And it's interesting that if he gets down into Egypt, as I show you how this is laid out, he'd collapse Syria and Iraq. The Kurds would fall down to the Baghdad Shush area. They would align with Iran. Iran would fall, both those nations of the Kurds, and Iran would fall based on Daniel 8. Then he would then gain authority, probably his crown, allow 10 nations to form, and end up in Egypt before being brought back into Israel. And I indicate that it's extremely important in this verse of Ezekiel 38:4, verse 4, It doesn't indicate what some people say. I think they try to add things because it says something later and they bring it into this conversation. But I'm going to sort of explain what I mean by that. I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and bring thee forth, and all thy army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with their sorts of armor, even the great company with bucklers and shields, and all of them handling swords. Now, a lot of people will say that he says something about the northern parts here, but it doesn't say anything about the northern parts here. He says he will bring him by hooks, he will bring him forth, and Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them. Wow, that's interesting. Iran and Africa, Egypt is down in this area, are with them. So he's not talking about a northern army here. He's talking about an army that potentially might be absorbed Iran and African. And that there are northern bands, but those are from Tagama. Okay, well that's up by, that's not in, that's on the eastern side of Turkey. That has nothing to do with Russia. Okay. So I think they take this and they bring it up here and they say, well, then he pulls him from the northern areas. Well, it doesn't say that. He says part of them come from the northern areas, but most of them come from down here, I believe. And so when you look at those verses that I've indicated, I believe that it's sort of a misrepresentation that this army has to come from the north, because he's already devastated Iran, went to Egypt, and then is going to get pulled back to Israel. And he leaves a sixth of that army there. And then later in the paradigm, we see all these judgments against Egypt as we move forward. So I thought that was an extremely important point to bring up. So when he's brought up with the hook, he leaves armies behind. He comes between the two seas. He attacks Israel, and 15 days later, once he gives that authority for an hour, 15 days later, they're destroyed on the sixth seal. It's extremely important that we sort of see how this all works, and that he's brought back between the two seas of Jerusalem in Israel to attack Jerusalem in Israel at the end of this, and then is destroyed. Since all 10 nations are on the... Now, I've said this for a while. They're not going to nuke this area. I do not believe they will radiate this area, because these nations will be all on the doorstep of Israel. Okay? So nothing like that is going to happen. God is not going to radiate this area because he wants people to be there. Okay? That's part of the prophecy, is we're supposed to trample on the Temple Mount for 1260 days, the Gentiles, all this stuff. That cannot happen if the place is nuked. It just isn't going to. But the sixth seal could bring down surgical strikes on these armies and destroy them through God's hand and not be radiated. So I believe there will be some type of a nuclear strike, but it won't be nuclear fallout type strike. It will be surgical strikes from stars from heaven based on the sixth seal event, coming down and pummeling these armies to death. And then he indicates that he actually puts a plague on these armies and they kill each other, and so it just turns out bad for Gog and all of his armies of 10 nations that go against Israel. So I do not believe this will be raided. It also indicates that Egypt will be greatly affected by Gog prior to the attack of Israel, based on Isaiah 10:24. As death comes out and we see that fourth seal moving with Gog to that destruction on the sixth seal. What do you have? The fifth seal martyrs. They're coming out because why? A quarter of the world is now under destruction of Gog in the Middle East, and they're being killed for their faith in Jesus. And what does he tell them? He's going to give them white robes. They're going to rest for a while until all the rest of them basically join, which is when the elect and all the saints of great tribulation are taken up on the seventh trumpet. And I think it's extremely important that when we look at this, it's important because if death comes out and Hades and hell are following this white horseman with the bottomless pit, he's going to resurrect it in that location through the bottomless pit into an antichrist being as Satan is coming down. And so we need to watch these verses and how this is happening. So is he literally moving the bottomless pit during the horseman phase, through the pale horseman, the green horse phase, to this location for the destruction of Gog as we move forward? Now, it's interesting that God always does his judgments the same way. Joel 1 states that Israel will be under judgment of plague, disease, famine, and it will consume Israel prior to the attack of Gog of Joel 2. Now, I don't think Joel 2 is Armageddon. I've said that many times. I believe Joel 3 is, but Joel 2 is actually the attack of Gog in the Seals War. Joel 2 states the attack of Israel by Gog of Ezekiel 28 and 39 and the destruction of Gog or Erdogan and his 10 horned nations will happen by Jesus on the sixth seal, or the wrath of the Lamb and Jesus or the Son. Ezekiel 5:12 states something extremely important. I keep alluding to this. 1/3 of the Jews will die or perish by famine and pestilence. 1/3 of the Jews will die by the sword or Erdogan or Gog, and 1/3 will flee to the hidden place for the 1260 days, 42 months, or 3.5 years as a remnant, because they're the true believers in Jesus in Israel, in Jerusalem at that time. They will be saved. They will be hidden for the 1260 days, as Revelation 12 indicates. The 12 stars have formed over her. She comes down, is removed for 1260 days and hidden. So will be the Jews that are removed and hidden at that time. So we're going to see this hiding of this remnant in Jordan or Edom or Petra, as they will be protected throughout the 1260 days, as God tells us they will be. Ezekiel 38:4 states that this hook will be placed in Gog's mouth and he will be brought up against Israel. And I indicate that it doesn't necessarily state anywhere from the north. He has northern areas like Togarmah that come into play, but he's in Egypt and he's brought back between the two seas to attack Israel once Iran falls. Daniel 11:14 through 29 also alludes to this destruction of Erdogan, Gog, and his armies. Egypt and the countries like Saudi Arabia will not join the beast kingdom and will wage war against Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39 during the Seals War, or the first 6 seals. These countries will even wage war against Antichrist once he rises in 24 to the 6th bowl and the Battle of Armageddon in the end of 27. Okay, so now that I've laid all that out, so that you understand the events that are going to come up, we're going to go back and I'm going to show you something real quick. So we were in the step of 8 and that 4th seal or pale horseman, and how these 4 horsemen are going to affect the Middle East as we move forward, and Gog is going to attack Iran, end up in Egypt, and then end up in Israel, and then is destroyed on the 6th seal. So if you go from the 8th step to the 9th step, and you come down the chart, I know it's a little ways down here. I'm sorry I had to get into a lot of this setup so you understand how we move forward here. We have that fifth seal. So we're not at the sixth seal yet. Erdogan has basically encompassed a quarter of the world into war at this moment. He's getting ready to attack Israel. The martyrs from the quarter of the world, the elect, the saints, or the martyrs of that area, not the elect saints, I'm sorry. Just the martyrs of the fifth seal and the seals war, which are found under the altar of the souls, or slain for the word of God, are given white robes and told to rest until the elect saints and martyrs of great tribulation join them. Okay, so now the question I always have is, are the fifth seal martyrs brought up with the elect saints and martyrs of great tribulation and added in? It indicates that possibly they are, because they're waiting for them. And this is right after great tribulation, during the seventh trumpet when they're resurrected. So will these people be included? Possibly, since they held their faith. Turkey or Gog will collect 10 nations of Muslims. They will move through the Middle East. So I'm reiterating above because I wanted to set up the story and how these steps line. Now we're back into the steps, okay? So we're in this calendar, okay? In step 9. So I'm not trying to take you off course here. I'm trying to set this up so you understand how this all works. So we're in step 9 here. You have the fifth seal right after these 4 seals are broken up here, okay? So we're watching these seals break. All this is happening. The fifth seal breaks. The martyrs are saying, hey, when are you going to revenge us for all this? He says, don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of it on the sixth seal. I'm going to destroy all these nations, and you're going to rest for a while, and then we're going to watch the next phase start, the 7 trumpets. The elect are going to be selected. They're going to go into Antichrist, and you will join them when their job is finished. Turkey, Erdogan's going to collect those 10 nations, move through the Middle East. He's going to end up in Egypt, and then he's going to die on that 6th seal. 10 horde nations attack for 1 hour or 15 days. I've shown you how to break that down. 1,000 years of ours to 1 day of God. You break that down on a prophetic calendar, Hebrew calendar, 360-day calendar. It ends up being around 15 days, or 1 hour of God is 15 days of ours. During the 6th seal, we are cleansed. I believe he will cleanse and destroy the Temple Mount through those surgical strikes on the 6th seal. That way there won't be any confusion on the Temple Mount, and it will be rebuilt on the time that Antichrist comes back to abomination. And I show you that in the chart and about when I believe that will occur. So there won't be anything left of the Temple Mount. There won't be any dispute between the Christians, Muslims, and Jews. It'll just be a clean slate that they can rebuild off of. That is my speculation, but I believe that anything can happen as God or Jesus is dropping surgical strikes on the planet, destroying 10 nations, and setting up his playing field for the next phase called the trumpets, or the 7 trumpets. This next step in 10 is the 6th seal, or the great earthquake. The sun becomes black as sackcloth or of hair, and moon becomes as blood. Stars fall from heaven. Figs are cast in untimely fashion. Excuse me. And that may be, I don't know what October and figs matter, so that's something that you might want to look into, why figs might be in an untimely manner in October. That's a really interesting question I just thought of. Heavens depart as a scroll, mountains and islands on the earth. All. 6 seals a bad event. It's a global earthquake event. Everything's happening here. He's throwing down an earthquake. The sun and the moon are turning into blood. Stars from heaven are pummeling these nations of Gog. He's telling you it's an untimely time, potentially October. Maybe that's bad for figs. Heavens depart as a scroll, so the heavens are departing, mountains and islands all over the earth are being displaced, and the wrath of the Lamb or the Son is being placed down on Gog of Ezekiel at that very moment. And so now we're into October 10th through the 25th of October on my paradigm that I've shown you, okay? That's this event up here that I was talking about, okay? Between the 3rd of January and the 10th or 25th of October. So you can see how that relates to what we're talking about down here and how we are now coming up to potentially that event. Because if Turkey invades, takes out Iran in the next few months, heads up in Egypt, and in October he is attacking Israel, and I say that he even has to attack Israel sooner because you can't get to Egypt without going through Israel because there's a choke point there called the Red Sea that they'll have to go through Israel to get to Egypt and then back into Israel. So they'll already probably be attacking. And if Turkey invades Syria and Iraq at the same time, they would go into both countries with full force. And so as they're attacking Iran, they're already heading towards Egypt. So it would just encompass the whole area. I've shown you these verses here so you can see all the different events that might be a sixth seal event and how they form and occur and what might be happening during them. I talk about how Jesus on the sixth seal is going to throw these surgical strikes against his army, induce plagues on them, and turn on each other and kill themselves. All these verses talk about this stuff. Gog, Ezekiel 38 and 39 will die by the hand of Jesus or the Lamb on the sixth seal event. The prominent horn of Daniel is broken, and he is dead with his armies. The residue rises of 10 regions or new kingdoms. 3 of them are overthrown, and then you have a presentation of Antichrist, which overthrows those other 3 regions of the 4. I probably said that backwards. So 10 nations turn into 4, turn into 1, called the Beast Kingdom. And I explained that earlier, how that happened. Erdogan and his armies are buried in Ham and Gog in northern Israel. All 10 nations of armies that go against Israel are destroyed on the 6th seal in Revelation 6:16. Erdogan and all his armies are buried in Ham and Gog for 7 months. From the destruction of these 10 nations of Muslims on the 6th seal event in 6:16. You can also find that in Ezekiel 38:11 through 16. In this event, 2 out of 3 Jews will perish by either plagues or the attack of Gog in Joel 1 and 2, and Jerusalem will be invaded, but the walls will not be broken into for almost 2 years. A residue will rise from these 10 nations that basically are destroyed. 4 regions will come from that, and then the little horn will come out of one of those and overthrow the other 3 regions. Any of the Jews that are not hidden or killed in this event will be placed into captivity. In step 11, all men, great and small, will hide in the rocks and ask for them to fall on them, because they know that this is an event that no one's ever seen anything like this. This will be beyond a 10-point earthquake. It'll be insane, and you will know, because you will know the story if you're following it, that this event is happening at this very moment, and that you probably didn't do enough to prepare, because at that moment the system will be broken. And so that's what I keep saying. If you haven't prepared, in 5 months we have a 6th seal event, and you haven't done anything, then what are you going to do when that happens? Because you're not going to go to the store and just pick up anything you want and hope you've got time to get ready for this. It will come upon you, and it will be devastating when it hits you, and you will not be ready if you have not prepared. But you have up to 1,580 days to get to the end of the story, and you've got the next 5 months to prepare for the potentially the sixth seal event that's coming up. So I talk about how chapter 7 is a subchapter where he has a vision. John is taking out a vision between chapter 6 and 8. So if you go at the end of chapter 6, you go to the sixth seal event. You go to chapter 8, you go to the seventh seal event. If you look at the middle of that, what is he doing? He's selecting 144,000. He's taken into a vision. It shows John what's going to happen to these 144,000, how they're going to be selected, sealed, go against Antichrist, and more than likely most of them are going to die. But as he indicates, based on that 1,335 days of Daniel, he shortens that second half to what? 75 days. 1,265 or 1,260 days minus 1,335 days is 75 days. And I show you how that works on the paradigm chart, which would be from abomination to the end of the bowls. Okay. But I think it's really important that something happens here that he talks about, and there's a transition here that we should be concerned with. He talks about how the four angels will hold back the four winds on the seventh seal, and the four winds are released on the sounding of the sixth trumpet. Why the sixth trumpet? Because that's when the Antichrist comes up with the false prophet. Okay. We have 3.5 years from the signing of the 7-year treaty to abomination of desolation. Now I give you these steps because those work with the chart steps here. So if you go in here and you look at the steps up here in the chart, you'll see these steps. Okay. And if you go down this chart, you'll see that they link to these steps here. Okay, so when you're in the 7th chapter and he's talking about the four winds, they're released on the 7th seal. The four winds are being held on the 7th seal, and they're released on the 6th trumpet during the rise of Antichrist. So these four winds are actually doing something prior to being held. Then they're held on the 7th seal, and then they're released again on the 6th trumpet for the rise of Antichrist. So these winds are constantly turning on and off, at least based on what I'm getting here. That somehow these four angels were using the four winds until the 7th seal, and then they're holding them. And then they release them again on the 6th trumpet when Antichrist rises. So that's extremely important. I think we should see how that works. And they talk about the four winds in a number of places in the Bible. So you need to watch that. But these steps are extremely important so you can understand how it works on the chart. And you can keep following through this process and see how they work with all the different charts and things that I produced here. Four angels stand on the four corners and hold back the four winds on the 7th seal, but are told not to hurt the earth until God's servant, the elect, are chosen and sealed, and these are the 144,000 from the 12 tribes. These four winds are not released until the 6th trumpet. So that's why I say, I think if you look at those trumpets, they are fairly quick. You have the 7th seal, you have the selection of 144,000. Those first four trumpets are fast. They've devastated a third of the planet. You get into that 5th trumpet, and that's the bottomless pit opening. You get into the 6th trumpet, and the Antichrist and the false prophet rise. And then there's a big gap between the 6th trumpet and the 7th trumpet. So it gets interesting at that point, because you don't realize that the gap between the 6th trumpet and the rise of Antichrist and the coming back of the Lord is approximately 1,335 days. So just sort of keep that in mind. And you can also see that on the paradigm timeline of the 1335 days between the signing of the treaty and the Feast of Trumpets of October 2nd and 3rd, when I believe the Lord will come back and take the people from great tribulation away that held their faith. So it indicates that a great multitude of martyrs of all nations from great tribulation appear in heaven. And that's what I mean. You're going to go forward, and I know this is going to be a very controversial statement. There is more than one rapture. There is more than one taking up of God's people. And it tells you that in the Bible if you follow these steps and you read it step by step in the Bible. He gives you this process. And I will give you that process as we move forward, because I cannot change the steps in the Bible. So I keep saying each of the steps, the 117 steps, I can't change. I can give you information between all this, but I cannot change the steps themselves because they're stated in the Bible itself. So when the seventh seal happens, you have a half an hour of silence, or about 7.5 days, based on that biblical breakdown I give you. Once all 7 seals are broken, based on how it's stated in Revelation 8, 1 and 2, all 7 seals are broken, half an hour of silence, then and only then are the 7 trumpets handed out, that we have to look at that procession. And so when you go into John's calendar up here and you look at how that's laid out, it's laid out that 7 seals happen first, and then in 8, 1 and 2 Revelation, it indicates that after these 7 seals, he hands out 7 trumpets. It's set up like this for a reason. Now, once he selects these 144,000, we see this angel, and Gog is also being buried, or getting ready to be buried with his 10 army nations in Ham and Gog at this point, because now they've been destroyed on the 6th seal. An angel fills a censer with fire of the prayers of the saints and throws it on the earth, where we see thunders, voices, thunderings, lightnings, and earthquakes. The first 4 trumpets, I just talked about this, I believe will be in quick procession, will magnify the opening of the bottomless pit and Satan being cast down from heaven on the 5th trumpet and resurrected into Antichrist and the appearance of the false prophet, which occur on the 6th trumpet, which are the 2 beasts in Revelation 13, 1 through 18 verses, called the beasts of the sea and the earth. The beast of the sea is the Antichrist. The beast of the earth is the false prophet. So in these first 4 trumpets, you see extremely devastating things that take out basically 1/3 of the planet. It destroys all the plant life. It destroys the sea and the sea life. It destroys the fresh water. And we see an asteroid or wormwood actually come down from heaven, hit the planet, and we see it poison all 1/3 of the waters of the earth. And so people are dying from, massive amounts of people are dying from this. The 4th trumpet is 1/3 of the moon, sun, and the starlight are removed. I believe that this is, these first 4 trumpets will affect mainly the communist areas. So if you lay the map of the world out and you look at 1/3 of the world that would be devastated by trumpets that won't affect God's plan, it would probably be the communist areas, because I can't cut another 1/3 of the world out that makes sense. This will allow God to contain and control the prophecy area of Gog Magog. God will not allow anyone to affect his plan and timeline for these 10 Muslim regions in the Middle East, or the footprint of the old Ottoman Empire or Alexander the Great. So this footprint will be the beast kingdom that will come forward, and he indicates that through multiple different resources why it comes from these regions through the statue and all the other things that he's given you. In step 18, John sees a flying eagle. In my Bible, the Revised Standard Version, it's an eagle. In some Bibles, like the King James Version, it is an angel. That sounds off with a loud voice and announces a warning that I've been talking about the last three trumpets with the last three woes, and how we have to watch how they move through the main chapters and sub-chapters, but can only happen once. And they do. If you look at this timeline up here, especially up here, they only happen once. So in Revelation 1 and 2, you have the fifth trumpet. Or 9, 1 and 2, you have the fifth trumpet. You have the sixth trumpet, which occurs in this passage here of Revelation 9 or 13 through 14. And then what happens? We see this gap. Why? Because he takes him into a vision in Revelation 12, 13, 11, 12, 13, and 14. And when does he come out of that vision? He goes into the vision when he eats a scroll in Revelation 10:7. He comes out of the vision after he prophesies the nations for 4 chapters in Revelation 15:1. And that's when the seventh trumpet happens in Revelation 15:1. So when you go from 10:7, and he doesn't blow that, he does not blow that trumpet in Revelation 10:7. He tells you that the God's plan will be fulfilled when he does. But when is that? That's in Revelation 15:1. But between that is a vision of the people and nations in chapter 11, 12, 13, and 14. So you go from chapter 10, 7, verse 7, chapter 10, verse 7, to Revelation 15:1. And if you look at how it's laid out in here, that's how I told you it would lay out. You go to Revelation 10:7 to Revelation 15:1. It starts the story over again, but you have these sub-chapters that work down through here. So he has this warning. He tells you about this. And Revelation 8:13 to me is extremely important, because that told me that I had to watch these last 3 trumpets and how they work with the 3 woes, and how they can only happen once in the main chapters, but they constantly recur down in those sub-chapters. So he's telling you there's a reason for that. And why is this warning so important? Because on the 5th trumpet, what is happening? Satan is being thrown from heaven to the planet for the short period of 1260 days prior to abomination. Okay, so what are we seeing? At that moment, the 5th trumpet, or the first woe, is happening. A star, which is Satan, or this angel, falls from heaven, is given a key to the bottomless pit or the abyss in hell. Why? Because you're going to have a resurrection of dead Gog, of Ezekiel 38 and 39, from the bottomless pit that opens on the 5th trumpet into an antichrist on the 6th trumpet, based on these verses. Locusts come from the bottomless pit and torment, not kill man for 5 months, and their king is the angel of the bottomless pit, or he's Hades, and they will not hurt the people of God on their forehead. Now this is interesting, because when that bottomless pit opens, we see this 5-month process of men being stung by scorpions that are not sealed by God before Antichrist even comes out. So when we talk about that 7-month burial, and if you look at the paradigm, it's interesting that when he's buried here between October and March, well, that's 5 months. So is there a reason there's 5 months between this gap? And then shortly after that, we see him overthrow those 3 regions from the residue of the 10. And then he signs the treaty of the nations 30 days after he stops the continual burnt offerings. And then we have abomination of desolation 1260 days later. I believe that's what he's alluding to here. So these locusts come out of the bottomless pit and torment men for 5 months. Now, if he's buried in October, we're talking about March. When this event would then stop, that would be March of 24. we get into the sixth trumpet event. So if you go into that timeline, he would rise in here, overthrow those three nations, other regions of the four that formed from the residue of the 10, and then he would then have a formed beast kingdom. He would stop the continual burnt offerings, and then he would sign a treaty with the nations that would then take us into tribulation. Because tribulation runs from the time the treaty is signed to abomination, runs for 1260 days. But prior to that is the sorrows and birth pains. Once you get to abomination, then you start into great tribulation. Okay, so there is demarcations here and very specific reasons why we're not in tribulation now, because we're still in the birth pains and sorrows, and that we won't be in tribulation until he actually signs the treaty. He tells you that clearly in many passages. The tribulation will start when he signs the treaty. It runs 1260 days to abomination, and then at that moment he desecrates God's seat, and we go to great tribulation. So on the sixth trumpet, the four winds are reloosed again, or they're released, and the beast of the sea and the false prophet, the beast of the earth, rise. Okay, so now the Ottoman Empire is destroyed. Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39, which has been dead, laying in a grave for some time, now is resurrected into an antichrist. Because at that moment, the four angels, winds, or cherubim are released upon the planet. Now we start to get back into this paradigm, because now we're in, if you go into that timeline, we're into March 21st of 2024. And that takes you to this paradigm, okay? And I start talking about taking you back to the chart. Talk about the continual burnt offerings being stopped for 30 days prior to abomination. That adds up to the 1290. 30 days plus 1260 gives you to abomination, 1290 days. If you go from signing the treaty 1335 days, that would take you through abomination of 1260 days and 75 days past, which is that shortened half of 75 days, or the second half of the 7 years that's shortened on this chart. Let me go there so I don't confuse you. So you have the 1290, you have 30 days. He stops the continual burnt offerings. 1260 days later, we have abomination. And then that 1335 days matter because the 75-day gap between the 1260 and this 1335 would take you between abomination and the Feast of Trumpets when the Lord comes back. And then you have 15 days or 1 hour of God's wrath, or the 7 bowls, which would then take you to the Feast of Tabernacles in 27. So there's a reason why these dates are down here, and don't forget about those 2300 days from the Feast of Tabernacles to June 30th. And these 4 dates are indicated many times, especially in Daniel, that we should watch these dates for a very specific reason. So if we go back to this paradigm and we get to January 20th of 2024, we have the signing of the 7-year treaty with the nations and Antichrist. 1260 days to abomination at this moment. So we have a time stamp here. And I think it's extremely important that if this is the case and the 1290 is 30 days prior plus the 1260 to abomination, that if he stops these continual burnt offerings, then we know at that moment, 30 days later, we're going to sign a signing of the treaty with the nations, and that would then start the 1260 days and tribulation as we move forward. So another thing that I think people miss, and I don't think they quite understand what it means, and maybe I don't either, but this is my interpretation, that when the numbers of the armies were 200,000. At this moment, when Antichrist is released and he signs that treaty, that we then release 200 million radical Islamic Muslim, or an army of radical Muslims upon the earth, based on Revelation 9:16, not my word, and that they are released on the earth against the Jews and the Christians. Why? Because they'll be trying to convert us to Islam. Okay? So they're going to be hunting you down. They don't care about the Christians and the Jews. The world's not going to like us much. So they're going to not. This group of Muslims are going to be a problem for us. And so we need to understand what he means by this. And if you take that footprint of all those nations and add them up, it comes up to about this. That is the footprint of Alexander the Great and the old Ottoman Empire that will be the new Neo-Ottoman Empire when it comes back out. So in step 24, if you go to this calendar and you're in step 24, we're about in here. You know, if you get into this calendar, let me blow this up real quick so we can sort of keep an eye on all this as we're moving down the charts. I don't want to leave anybody out here. So we're in step 24 here. We're just prepared for the tribulation of the 1260 days, 42 months, or 3.5 years. If you go to the timeline, you're here. Okay? See how that works? Michael comes down wrapped in a cloud, rainbow over his head, and pillars like fire. Angel Michael's plays big. He controls Satan. He controls this whole thing. He casts him out of heaven. He opens the pit, gives the key to Satan, which allows him to bring Antichrist from the abyss. He has a small scroll in his hand and has feet on both sides of the bottomless pit, the right foot on the sea and the left foot on the earth. This opening of the bottomless pit or abyss is just prior to the rising of the beasts of the sea, Antichrist, and the beasts of the earth, or the false prophet. When the angel Michael calls out in a loud voice, the seven thunders sound. In step 27, John is told not to write down what the seven thunders said and seal up the scroll. And you can see each of these have a verse. We're just moving through the Bible here. We're not making this stuff up. You can go right to your King James Bible, King James Version Bible, and see these very specific verses. Step 28, Angel Michael, standing on the sea and earth, lifts up his right hand to heaven and swears to God that there should be no more delay. Why? Because he's now blowing the sixth trumpet, or the fifth trumpet. Satan is going to be thrown down. He's going to open this pit up, and we're going to see a resurrection. He states that on the day, or on that day, the seventh angel with the seventh trumpet will sound or blow, and the mystery of God will be fulfilled. And I keep talking about that. He does not blow that seventh trumpet in Revelation 10:7. He does, though, in Revelation 15:1. Why? Because he takes you into this vision of the people and nations in these subchapters so you can see what's going on the ground during that period of time. And so you can microscope down into these areas and see what's happening to the Gentiles on the ground as they're trampling the city for 1260 days, as it indicates in these 4 chapters. And it's really interesting. You know, chapter 11 is about the 2 witnesses and how they perish, or how they prophesy for 1260 days and then perish right after abomination. Chapter 12 is about the woman coming down from heaven with the stars above her head, and she's hidden for 1260 days, and the potential 1/3 of the Jews are hidden with her. You get into chapter 13, what is that about? The two beasts of the sea and the earth rising for the time that they're on the ground of the 1260 days. And then you get into chapter 14, what happens immediately? You see the rapture of the people from Great Tribulation as they move forward, and what happens to them, and what happens to the end of the nations and people in that vision. And then what happens when you go to Revelation 15:1? Immediately we see that he starts to hand out the 7 bowls, which means that he just blew the 7th trumpet. It is important to watch these last 3 trumpets, the 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpet each, because they have an attached woe. Also, you need to watch the 1260 days, the 42 months, or the 3.5 years that work back and forth through the 14 main and sub chapters, or this warning in Revelation 8:13, which allowed me to build this chart here. And I don't mean that, I mean it literally made this one verse, 8:13, allowed me to build this whole chart, because it told me how the trumpets worked, and that then allowed me to build this timeline in the proper fashion, so that it gives you a chronological order. And then the 3 other visions that are broken out while John's in heaven, and he has these 3 additional visions. So it's extremely important that this warning was given to me, and how these trumpets led me to break this book down properly. When we get into Isaiah 14, it states that Satan will be thrown out of heaven forever on the 5th trumpet, resurrected into Gog, or Antichrist, out of a grave, or the abominable branch will be cast out of the hole, but Satan won't touch the grave. This bottomless pit, or this abyss that forms in him and Gog, and that a supernatural being called Antichrist will appear on the 6th trumpet from this abyss. This event will occur after the 6th seal breaks. Erdogan, which is Gog with Ezekiel 38:39, is killed with his 10 nations. The world will marvel at this resurrection and the rise of a dead Gog with Ezekiel 38:39 into an Antichrist supernatural being. The rise of the 2 beasts, the sea and earth, in Revelation 13 are during the resurrection of Gog, or Erdogan, a dead Erdogan buried in Hamagog, into the Antichrist on the 6th trumpet. The false prophet will be the Pope, I believe. He will then break the church, because he will do something. Look, he's going to be helping Antichrist, so he's not going to be on the Christian side anymore. I believe he's the Pope. So what would happen? And you have to think about that. How would he do this? And there's nothing that really tells us how that would happen. But he's going to somehow be next to Antichrist, while Antichrist is on the temple of God. And so he's not going to be in Rome. He's going to be close. And we talk about Pergamus being the seat of the beast, or Satan, and how Pergamum could be Mystery Babylon. And so I believe there will be a conduit between Israel and Pergamum, and the false prophet or the Pope will be close to him. But then that means what will happen to the church? And if most people think they're going to be pre-raptured and taken up before any of this happens, the churches are already going to be broken, and a lot of people are going to have this falling away of the church at that time anyway. And so I think that's something that we should be watching. So another thing that I think we should look at, as we talk about the false prophet in Revelation 13:18, we talk about the number of a man, 666, which is attached to the beast of the earth in Revelation 13:18, not the beast of the sea in Revelation 13:1 to wherever it ends up, the beast of the earth in this chapter, because it indicates at the very end of this chapter that this 666 is the number of the man, which is part of the prophecy of the false prophet or the beast of the earth, which is probably the Pope. So the question I had there would be, okay, if we have a resurrection of Antichrist or a resurrection of Gog into Antichrist as a supernatural being, because he's dead and then he's brought back to life. It's the wound that's healed and then brought back as the 8th king. Then what happens to the Pope? Is he impregnated? Because when Satan is thrown from heaven, a third of the angels fall with him. What are these angels doing? Are they impregnating dead bodies from Gog's armies? These supernatural beings are going somewhere. They're doing something. They're being thrown to earth. How many are there? What are they being? How are they affecting us? What are these angels doing? What are these Nephilim doing, or whatever they are when they come down here? Are they actually impregnating people or dead beings? And could one of them actually impregnate the Pope, because he has a tendency to do miraculous things like bring fire down from heaven as they're exalting the first beast, the beast of the sea, because it's not about the false prophet, it's about Antichrist. But this beast here, this beast of the earth, has special powers. He's not a man, or he's not a man anymore, maybe. So I don't know exactly what's happening there. It doesn't give us a lot of information about what is happening to the false prophet, other than this is a supernatural event and God creates a delusion on the world to exalt these, and most people will. From the 10-nation Muslim horde destruction by Jesus or the Lamb on the Revelation 16, or the sixth seal, we see those 4 regions form. We see the little horn come out. He overthrows those 3 regions as stated in Daniel 8. Once the Antichrist is resurrected, he will gain authority quickly and overcome the other 3 regions and create a new beast kingdom out of this diversified area of the 4 regions of total. So 4 regions form, 1 becomes prominent, he overthrows those other 3 regions. 30 days after the appearance of Antichrist, well, I should say that differently on here. I probably said this wrong. After Antichrist appears, we see him stop the continual burnt offerings, and 30 days later, we see that signing of the treaty once those 3 regions are taken over by Antichrist. And then we talk about those 1290, 1260, and the 1335 days and how all that works. Then once we get back down here, we stop talking about the paradigm again. So you came from this stamp up here of the paradigm of April 20th of 24. Now, this is an extremely interesting date for me, because like I said, Erdogan invaded on October 9th of 2019 on Yom Kippur, which was my birthday. Potentially, this signing of the treaty with the nations could potentially happen on my father's birthday, because that is April 20th of 2024. And so if you go into this chart, that's my birthday and that's my father's birthday. I don't know if there's anything there. It's just probably coincidence. But it's interesting timing in my family tree. And like I say, I believe that my grandmother was a major factor in my walk in life and how I ended up where I am today. So anyway, just some interesting dates. Yes, April 20th of 24 is my father's birthday, as October 9th of is my birthday. So I don't know if that means anything or not. Just interesting timing. Coincidence? Probably. The signing of the treaty, 7-year treaty of nation, happens on this date based on the paradigm. 1260 days from that date to abomination, where you had up here 1290 days, because 30 days prior you had the stopping of the continual burnt offerings. The number of armies were released for the 200,000 or 200 million radical Muslims across the world that will then go against the Christians, Jews, and either convert them or kill them. So as we get down into here, and I might be reiterating some of this. Yes, I am. We're going to come back down. Oops. Let me come back down here, because now I'm here. Okay, I went from that top, I know where I was. I lost my train of thought. Okay, so we go from this date, which is my father's birthday, to this date of October in 24. Okay, this is where the paradigm picks up again. Okay, I'm going to try to knock through some of this fairly quickly here, as I know that the video is getting fairly long. So on October 12th of 2024, we have, based on these verses, a new part of the paradigm. It indicates that there will be a prophecy against the king of Egypt, and that Egypt will be devastated by plagues, famine, and the sword, based on these verses. On January 7th of 2025, Egypt is completely broken by Antichrist. Not by anybody, by Antichrist. Okay? So now we are into Antichrist. Wow, he's been resurrected. Now we're into Antichrist. Wow, that's really amazing how this paradigm actually works. And the peoples are scattered throughout the nations. March 1st of 2025, the king of Egypt and his people are cut off from the world, and they will be slain by the Assyrian later, as indicated by Antichrist. And I'll show you where that ends up here as we move forward. Right now we have a leader of Egypt. It's Al-Sisi. He'll be there till 24. If Egypt is under duress here, he may not have a re-election, and he still may be the leader of Egypt when this plague and these judgments hit, because I don't think they'll be in a position to run elections at that moment. That's just speculation. But if all this is happening, will they be able to run an election in 24? Would he be the leader that would be under this judgment? April 9th of 25, famine is so severe, no food is found in Jerusalem. And the city is breached. And that's what I mean. It's attacked and besieged on October 10th of 2023, but it is not breached until April 9th of 25. And so that residue of these nations will be constantly attacking them, and they will finally finish the job. They will break. The city is broken up. The lands are signed throughout the treaty with a residue of the princes of the 4 regions that are now the new beast kingdom combined, as indicated in these areas and this verse. The Israel's president Rivlin flees the city on the plains of Jericho at this point here. And so I wanted to show you that. So we have this famine in Jerusalem. Jerusalem's under massive duress. The city is broken up. Treaties are being formed. Between April 9th of 25 and May 10th of 25, we start to see this next event happen. Jeremiah, at this time in the past, is removed from prison and taken to Babylon and placed in this guy's care. In this future event, Isaac Herzog, Reuben Rivlin, will flee the city on this date, as indicated here on the paradigm based on this verse. And you can see the verses as we move forward. They keep falling down in procession. that Israel is burnt. So the city is broken into here. And over the next month, they're burning the houses and all this stuff. They're hiding the king. You realize they can't get out of this place easily. They're surrounded. So it gets to the point where it gets so bad that they burn all these houses and stuff of the king and Isaac Herzog's home, all the leaders' homes, all this stuff's getting burned up. And at that moment in time, President Revelin tries to escape and is captured on the plains of Jericho. His eyes are taken out. Both his sons are killed, and he is removed to Babylon. It is the same thing that happened to Zedekiah in the past. Okay? Same thing. Isaac Herzog has already been captured in October of 23. He's not in a position to do anything. Reuben Revlin is captured. Then what would happen? Antichrist would assign a new leader. That would be the 12th leader. That would fulfill Enoch's prophecy of the 12th leader season. Once it's complete, the story is over. And what happens to that 12th leader? He's killed. This assigned leader is killed by Antichrist, and we're going to talk about that now. These walls are broken down. The residue of the people are taken to Babylon. So all the Jews are rounded up. They're taken to Babylon. At this point, I question that the question has arisen. I believe that the temple will be rebuilt between this time of the walls being broken in to abomination, which would then give them approximately up to 2 years to rebuild the third temple, between May 10th of 25 when they break in the walls to July 19th of 2027. Based on my paradigm, I indicate this is the abomination of desolation, which would occur on this date, that could happen within these 2 years. That third temple could be rebuilt. If it is destroyed on the sixth seal and cleansed, or whatever, maybe it's destroyed through Gog, but it's destroyed and then it's rebuilt, because that's what it tells us. Now, this is an interesting point here, that in July of 25, based on 2025, based on these verses, the son of Netanyahu, and I get talking about how this spelling is close to Netanyahu, and this might be a Nostradamus type thing. So if you look at Netanyahu down here, and this guy's name here, you realize that if you remove the H, you change the Y and the I, and remove the U, this is the same name. So is Netanyahu a part of prophecy in the Bible? I believe so. And I believe he will help Reuben Revlin as Isaac Herzog is captured and taken out of commission. Once this king is gone, then Antichrist places in a new leader, or a regional leader, governor, and he's killed. So the son of Netanyahu, I'm sorry, it's Netanyahu. I don't know how else to look at that. And I gave you a little lineage here. He rises up with 10 men and smotes and kills this leader with a sword. He kills all these guys. He like actually 10 men rise up and they kill like 60 of 70 men in this. And you go back and look at this in Jeremiah. And what happens? The last 10 men at the end of Jeremiah barter with him the silver for the land. Remember that in the book? And Jeremiah is looking at everybody going, yes, I have the silver for a reason. I'm buying the new land of Israel, of the Jews. I'm purchasing the first plot of land. Okay? And so, is this son of Netanyahu going to affect Antichrist and kill this governor at the end in 25? And would it then be one of his sons named Abner or Yar, which are he has 2 sons. Wow, amazing. One of these sons will also proclaim a fast to the Lord in September of 26. And what happens? Jerusalem is smitten right after that and destroyed and laid desolate and destroyed. On December 1st of 26, God places a laminate over and a net over Egypt and states that he will kill and judge everything there. So now we're back to Egypt again, and how there's going to be this massive judgment against Egypt and how it's going to end up terrible for them. When we get in December 15th, a multitude in Egypt are cast down. They will lie with the heathen in the pit of the hell, and the king of Egypt will perish with all his people. Wow, what a terrible conclusion for Egypt. And that sort of makes sense because Egypt runs from Israel when Turkey attacks them. They were supposed to help because remember, Israel recruits Egypt and Turkey. Then they don't pay the Babylonian. The Babylonian takes care of the Assyrian or Iran and then comes back to take care of Israel. And what did Israel do? They wanted to rely on Egypt. They paid them money. Then what did Egypt do? They ran away and left Israel to be attacked by the Babylonian, or in this case, Turkey. So Egypt's going to get theirs, and that's probably part of the reason that they have this massive judgment against this country of Egypt. On July 19th of 2027, we indicate that abomination of desolation occurs on October 2nd and 3rd of 2027. We have the Feast of Trumpets and Rosh Hashanah and the seventh trumpet. I believe that is when the Lord Jesus comes back to earth. Shortly after that, I indicate that in the chart, that right after the seventh trump it sounds, he hands out the seven bowls, and right after that you see the sea of the elect of the saints, martyrs, and elect of great tribulation on that time. That maybe should be a Revelation 15:1 and 2. Seventh trumpet is blown, third woe is released, probably during the Feast of Trumpets in 27, as indicated on the chart. And this would also be based on the paradigm and the parable of the fig tree in Psalm 90:10 is laid out on the chart. This event occurs in these passages in the Bible. Once the seventh trumpet is blown in Revelation 15:1, then we see the angels given the seven bowls of God's wrath. So there's a procession. There's seven seals. Once those seven seals are broken, we have seven trumpets. Once those seven trumpets are blown, we go to the seven bowls. Okay, so it's pretty basic understanding. And if you go to Revelation 8:1 and 2, that should verify that, because it clearly states that all seven seals are broken, a half an hour of silence, and then he hands out the seven trumpets. Or all seven seals are broken, and he hands out the seven trumpets. So it makes sense. Then look at what happens. We come back to the paradigm. You have from this Feast of Trumpets and the seventh trumpet, we start into the bowl phase, or that 1 hour of God's wrath, or 15 days on earth. That would fall between the October 2nd of 27 and the 17th of 27 of October. That would be your 15 days or 1 hour of God's wrath on earth. We see the seventh trumpet blown, the seventh trumpet during the Feast of Trumpets or Rosh Hashanah. Right after the seven angels with the seven bowls are filled with the wrath of God are given out and go forth to pour out on the wicked. And it clearly tells you at Revelation 15:1, we are not appointed for the wrath of God, that we are not here for the seven bowls, but we are here for everything prior to that. Then we see the people that had victory over the beast and his image in heaven and the clouds. These are the saints, elect, and martyrs of great tribulation. Now, does this include the fifth seal martyrs? I don't know. It indicates that they join them, so possibly. They are singing the song of Moses and the Lamb and are given harps. Then the temple of God is opened, but cannot be entered until the seven bowls of wrath are completed. So that's what I mean. 7 bowls are not going to be a long durational period. He's opening the temple. We're getting ready to do the judgments on the white throne, okay? He's not going to wait years for this to happen. It's a quick event. It's 15 days on earth. 1 hour. Between the Feast of Tabernacles and the Feast of Trumpets, 27. Okay? 1 hour of God's wrath, or 1 hour of God's time, is 15 days on this earth. The time between the start of the Feast of Trumpets, 27, Yom Kippur, and the Feast of Tabernacles in 27, between these dates would be the 15 days, or potentially that hour of God's wrath. We are now with God and Jesus, and are with and Jesus, and are in their presence, in both presence, because now we are tabernacling with God himself, and he is with us. And so at that moment, based on this chart, I show you that we are at that point tabernacling with God, and then we start to move into the millennial phase, okay, or the 1,000 years. The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of the Lord and the kingdom of Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. Return of the Lord in step 31. We go to the chart. We're talking about Feast of Trumpets here. If you go to John's chart and you blow it up, you're talking about the Lord coming back, and you have the rapture, and then he hands out the bowls. You have the 7 bowl phase, you have Armageddon, and then we start into the millennial, which takes you into the second Magog war, Satan being bound for 1,000 years, and then you have that war at the end of the 1,000 years. And so this is a processional event that's happening here. Now, this is going to get a little controversy as I move forward here, and I'm going to try to keep going here because I know this is going to get long, and I want to complete this, but I may not go completely into the end, and I'll explain why. So we have what we call the first rapture. I know everybody's going to get upset over this one. So in the first rapture, John sees a sea of glass mingled with fire, and all of those that have gotten the victory over the beast and its image and the mark, and over the number of his name, that stand in the sea of glass, having harps of God. These are the elect saints and martyrs from great tribulation. This has nothing to do with the people dead in the sea, in the earth, and in the ground. Okay? Doesn't have anything to do with them. He's talking about these people that gain victory over Antichrist and Satan while they're on the ground during Great Tribulation. It specifies Great Tribulation. I didn't say that. He did. Okay? Will that include those 5th seal martyrs in step 9? I don't know. It says that they will rest until they join the others once they get there. So I'm guessing maybe they will join these because they held their faith even in the Seals War, but I don't know that. They sing the song of Moses and the Lamb. The 7 bowls of God are handed out and poured on the non-believers. We're not here appointed for the wrath of God, or the 7 bowls in Revelation 15:1. The temple or the tabernacle is opened. Now look at how this is laid out. This is so important. I am following the Bible verse by verse here. I cannot make these things up. They're in the Bible and they lay them out perfectly for you. He sees the Ark of the Testament after the tabernacle or the temple is opened. You have these lightnings, earthquakes, and all this stuff going on. Once it's opened, the angels are holding the 7 plagues. They come out of the temple with the 7 plagues. One of the 4 beasts gives the 7 angels the 7 vials full of God's wrath. The temple is filled with smoke from the glory of God, but no man is able to enter the temple until all 7 vials are poured. And so that's what I mean. This is like a short period of time. The time they're handed out and they're poured down. It indicates that it's 1 hour of God's time, which would be 15 days of our time on the ground. And if you go into a lot of the verbiage, what happens? The whore is destroyed in 1 hour. The nations are given power for 1 hour. 15 days in a lot of these cases. The great voice from the temple of God is called out to the 7 angels to start pouring out God's wrath, or the 7 bulls. The first bull is poured out. You have these sores that come on the man with the mark of the beast. We're not here for any of this. We're taking up the 7th trumpet. The second bull is poured out on the sea. It becomes blood and everything dies. The third bull is pulled out on the waters and they're not drinkable anymore. So people are dying of thirst. Fourth bull is pulled out on the sun. Power is given to him to scorch people with fire. And they curse God with all these plagues. So they're not converting back to God. They're still doing their same thing. He's trying to get them to realize that God is in control here and they don't care still. The 5th bull is poured out on the seed of the beast. Wow, Pergamum and Turkey. The seed of the beast, the seed of Satan. Not Satan's bride, but his son's bride, Antichrist's bride. Okay? Men will not repent. Even after all this. God tells us something extremely important. God tells us that the bride and bridegroom will have no more voice. They will be heard from no more. Wow, interesting verbiage there. You have the bride of Jesus, which is Jerusalem. You have the bride of Antichrist, which is just Pergamus, which is the seat of the beast, or the seat of Satan. The power pinnacle of the evil one. Okay? This is because Mystery Babylon will be destroyed on the 5th bull in 1 hour. And the false prophet and Antichrist will be thrown in the lake of fire on the 6th bull during Armageddon. Remember, you go from 16 to 20. What happens? Satan is bound, and after 1,000 years, he's thrown in the lake of fire with the false prophet and Antichrist, because they're already there. The 6th bull is pulled out on the great river Euphrates. The water dries up. So when you hear people talking about the great river Euphrates drying up, it doesn't happen until the 6th bull. So you see a lot of videos right now, the Euphrates is drying up. Everything's drying up, okay? But it doesn't happen, and the 3 frogs don't come out of the mouth until the 6th bowl. And these 3 frogs are exorcised out of these bodies, and what happens? The false prophet and the Antichrist are thrown in the lake of fire, and Satan is bound for 1,000 years. Into the millennial phase. All the kings of the earth and the whole world are gathered to the battle, which is the great day called the Battle of Armageddon, or the 6th bowl. And then we see them thrown in the lake of fire. 7th bowl is dropped in the air. The voice of the great voice sounds from the throne of God, and it is done. Okay? At that moment, everything's done. Okay? So what's he going to do at that point? You see this thunderings and lightnings and everything. He splits the city into 3 parts. Mystery Babylon is broken into chunks. The great Babylon came into remembrance before God and gives her the cup of wine of his fierceness, of his wrath. And so Mystery Babylon at that point is totally devastated. Step 46 in the timeline up here. Okay, so that'd be about right in here. Every island fled from the mountains were no longer found. So he's rebuilding the world at this moment, because now he's poured out the 7th bowl. Okay. Men are killed with hail from heaven, the size and weight of a talon, which are about 75 pounds each. So these are boulders coming from heaven down upon these people, and they're being destroyed. Remember that chapter 17, 18, and 19, right at the beginning, or actually I should say this, at the end of 16, Revelation 16, he talks about he's going to take him into a vision of Mystery Babylon. He does that immediately in 17. He comes out of Revelation 19 because he has a vision of 3 chapters of Mystery Babylon. And then what happens? From 16 to 20, he starts the story. So at the end of 16, we go directly to 20. 16, we see the 3 frogs come out of the mouths of Satan, Antichrist, and the false prophet. Chapter 20 then shows us what happens to Satan, Antichrist, and false prophet. Chapter 17 talks about the woman sitting on the scarlet beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads, 10 horns. The woman arrayed in purple and scarlet, decked out in jewels, holding a cup full of abominations against God. On her head was written Mystery Babylon. So she's a city. We know that. She's drunken with the saint of the bloods, or the blood of the saints and the martyrs. I talk about Pergamos and how Pergamos was a major hub and many Christians were destroyed in that. He also alludes to a individual that is destroyed in the Bible in Pergamos itself in those letters. And so there's a lot going on there in Pergamos, and they did a whole study on that. You can go look at why Mystery Babylon is Pergamos, Turkey. The beast will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition for 42 months as Antichrist. Because Satan is bringing forth Antichrist out of the abyss. And these 7 heads of the beast are 7 kingdoms, and 10 horns are kings that will gain power for 1 hour of the beast. And we talked about how he gives them that power for 1 hour during the Seals War, and they're devastated. All those nations are broken. Those 7 kingdoms of the past kingdoms of the Jews that lead you to the Ottoman Empire, and the 10 regions of Muslims that have attacked Israel is what they're talking about here. His wrath is upon her and the people of the earth that are left. Chapter 18 starts out right away with the angel telling us Mystery Babylon is fallen, is fallen. You see that in Isaiah 21 also. And it talks about how Michael then throws a great millstone into the sea. So the sea has to be fairly close to this. Pergamos, Turkey is much closer than Mecca and some of these other places. And it could easily be destroyed by a large asteroid or something that would hit the earth in the sea and devastate that area. That the bride and bridegroom should be heard of no more, and Antichrist and his bride, Mystery Babylon, are destroyed forever. You get into 19, explains how God's judgment are true and righteous against the whore, that her destruction will be forever. And then we go back into those 24 elders that you saw in Revelation 4:4, which I don't believe are the church. They're the hierarchy of God's kingdom, and they're probably disciples and prophets of the past. And the 4 beasts worship God and sit on the throne, that the marriage of the Lamb has come, that God the bride is being prepared for in white for the supper of the Lamb. Jesus is coming back on the 7th trumpet. The bowls are being poured down to the time of Armageddon. And the 7th bowl, and the Antichrist and the false prophet are in the throne of the lake of the fire, which is why chapter 16 ends up going to 20. I know I'm reiterating these things, but I want you to see these connections. Chapter 20 starts by Satan being bound for 1,000 years, released, and then thrown in the lake of fire where Antichrist and false prophet already are in Revelation 20:10. No, it does not happen twice. Subchapter 17 shows us the same event that is reinforced in the main chapter of 20. So this is a vision John is having between chapter 16 and 20. And the same events occurring as it constantly does in this book. It's constantly reoccurring. The angel comes down from heaven with the bottomless key to the bottomless pit, or a chain in his hand. Satan is bound for 1,000 years, and he will be loosened for a short period of time for 1,000 years. The elect, martyrs, and saints of great tribulation lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years, or the millennial. But the rest, now, and this is extremely important. Remember, we had that first resurrection up here, okay? Of these saints, martyrs, and elect from great tribulation. But if you follow the book in chronological order and you get down into this area here, what happens? It says something really important. The elect, martyrs, and saints of great tribulation lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years, or the millennial. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years are finished. This is the first resurrection. And the second death has no power. Why? This is extremely important, because the elect, martyrs, and saints of great tribulation are the first fruit. The masses are judged when the great white throne appears in step 64, and the book of life is opened in step 66. The elect, martyrs, and saints that follow Satan in the millennial for the 1,000 years are consumed by God's hand by fire. And so in the second Gog-Magog war, these people are buried in dirt. They're consumed by God's hand by fire. And it's only the elect, martyrs, and saints of great tribulation, and maybe those fifth seal martyrs, that are part of this group. And those people that fail are consumed by God's hand by fire, because they're not flesh anymore. These elect, martyrs, and saints that have fallen are never subjected to the second death. Why? Because they're consumed by God's hand by fire. They're never placed in front of the white throne judgment. They're not in the book of life, and they're never thrown in the lake of fire, because they're consumed by fire here. And they never have eternity in hell. They're just vanquished. They are also not in the book of life. They are not thrown in the lake of fire, and they are not part of God's new eternity after the millennial. Okay? And heaven is brought down. They're not part of that. The heaven's joined with the earth later as we move forward here. Notice not everybody gets to join Jesus in the 1,000 years or the millennial. And that's going to be a grading point. Everybody thinks they're all going to be resurrected on the seventh trumpet. It's not the truth. It's not the truth. Only the elect, saints, and martyrs, and potentially maybe the people from the fifth seal and those martyrs of the seals war, will be raptured on the seventh trumpet, because the rest of these people do not live again until the 7 years are finished. I'm not saying this, the Bible's saying this, and I know this is going to really rub people the wrong way in a lot of ways. So, at the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is released. These people that fail are consumed by fire. They don't see the second death, because they never are judged in the book of life and never thrown in the lake of fire or gain access to heaven and the new kingdom after the millennial. So this is extremely hard for people to see. And this is for the elect, saints, and martyrs of great tribulation that come back on the seventh trumpet. This has nothing to do with the people that are buried and died prior to that. And so I want people to understand that you will get to heaven, but maybe not see the 1,000 years. That's for very special people, and that's why it's so important that you get this right. Because you want to get to the end of this story. And yes, it's going to be horrific. But I want to, even as bad as it's going to be on the ground, it's going to be horrific. I want to see the end of the story. I'd actually like to see if this actually plays out, because he gave me this word. He gave me this inspiration. Is it really going to come true? If it is, then I would be potentially one of those that could potentially see the 1,000-year kingdom. But if I die prior to that, I won't. I'll just be brought in after the 1,000 years with these people in the grave. In the grave. And as you move forward, you'll see that happen here. Look, the priests and these people of the millennial, these elect martyrs and saints of great tribulation and potentially the fifth seal martyrs, will be the teachers moving into the eternity. They will teach the masses because they will be prepared for 1,000 years. They will be the hierarchy of God's new kingdom. Satan will be loosened. They will be tested one more time. The people that go out, he will deceive the nations. They will be devoured by fire if they fail. It says that clearly here. Satan is thrown in the lake of fire with the false prophet and antichrist, and they will be tormented forever and ever. Then look at what happens. This is really cool, and this is what I mean by don't take people's word for things. Read this book as it's stated, because it clearly says this then. This is coming into this next rapture mode. Great white throne appears with God on it, and look, the dead, great and small, stand before God, because what happens? The books are opened. The dead are judged according to their works. The sea gives up the dead which are in it. Then hell gives up the dead in them. Okay? They aren't raptured up there. They're being brought up now and judged in the book of life in front of the white throne of God. We're a long way from the seventh trumpet now. Well, maybe not a long way, because this is happening fairly quickly. But now we're after the 1,000 years. Okay? So these people aren't brought up till then. So if you're dead and you haven't got into great tribulation and you haven't died for God, believing in Jesus as the Son, or made it to the end and raptured on the seventh trumpet, you don't see the 1,000 years. And these people, because they're delivered at this time and judged through the white throne event in the book of life, will see the second death. Why? Because the people that don't make it in the book of life here and are blotted out will be thrown in the lake of fire, which is the second death. They've already been dead once. They'll die again, and they'll die for eternity in the lake of fire once they're judged here. But they're not raptured on the seventh trumpet. And I know that's a sticking point for a lot of people. Of the dead on the planet, in the sea, and in hell, whoever is not found in the book of life is cast in the lake of fire. John sees the new heaven and the new earth. Okay, so now, after everything is judged, God is creating a new planet and a new earth and forming them together at this very moment. John sees New Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven. We have a voice from heaven. We tabernacle with man. God is tabernacling with us. God will dwell with us, and he will be with us and be our God. God will wipe away all our tears. God will make all things new. God is Omega and Alpha, and he will overcome, and he that overcomes will inherit everything, and he will be our God, and we will be with his Son, Jesus. Be careful of the second death, and to watch for the unbelieving, the abominable, the warmongers, sorcerers, idols, because there will be bad people still. Think about this. So 1,000 years have gone by, and the Lord and God have picked their teachers that are going to go into the eternity. And then all the other people are raised and then judged in the book of life in front of the white throne to move into the eternity. But they're not all going to be fantastic people, as it tells us here. And they're not all going to have rewards like everybody else. Some people will get more rewards than others. And that some people won't even be able to enter the city, the great city, because they're not great people. So it makes me wonder how that works at the end, because he says, be careful of the second death, and to watch these people, because they'll probably end up in the lake of fire. And I would guess that God would be discernful enough not to allow bad people to enter his eternity kingdom. So I guess most everybody will be good people or beings, because we won't be flesh beings anymore. We'll be immortal. And that's probably why he has to consume us by fire if he doesn't, if we fail. But you know, we will be given our rewards based at that time on everything, our works and whatever. You know, some people believe it's on works, some people believe this, some people believe that. Whatever it is, God will judge us, he will be merciful, and we will gain those rewards. I've asked two things on this one. One, the ability to understand the truth, and that I want a seat in heaven. Doesn't have to be the best seat on the planet. I just want a seat. And I don't, you know, as we move forward here, and I'm going to stop the video, because as we move forward, we talk about the new kingdom and how it gets beautiful, and he tells us all these really interesting things about the rewards. I don't think about the rewards very often, because that's not what this is about for me. It's about getting people to the seventh trumpet and getting them across the finish line to either be judged, to either get to the millennial phase with the elect saints and martyrs of great tribulation, or to be raised after the millennial or during that end of the millennial, during the white throne judgment, and allow them to get to eternity. So I mean, if I get to heaven and he gives me the rewards, it would be cool actually not to know what those rewards are, because think how cool they'll be when he actually gives them to you and you go, wow, I didn't know how cool this would really be. He tells you what a lot of these rewards are as we move forward. And I'm going to let you read those because I think they're important. And they are important because you need to understand what the goal is to get to the end of this and how beautiful this kingdom is. And you can read these. These are right out of the Bible. Takes you right to the end of the story. But do realize that this paradigm and this timeline could be affecting us today, and that these events could be happening in the next few months as we move into these date stamps. Now, I don't know whether this paradigm is right, and Daniel 8 will be my determination as we move forward in the next few months on whether this paradigm is true and is the truth and is given to me by God to give to you. I don't know. I can't believe that all this information was supplied to me for my salvation only. So why was this information given to me in this manner? I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out, because I'm no more special than any other person on this planet. I'm just telling you, based on the information and everything that I've shown you here, we potentially have a chain of events that is going to take place as we move forward, and we are getting there now. Okay? Your time is extremely short. based on my calendar of the paradigm, of this paradigm tree, of this date, of these dates, of these 2,300 days, to where we are now, which is around in here. Well, we're moving into the spring of 23, so we're right around in here. That we are a few months from here, and we're only about 1,580 days from here. So I don't know if this is going to come true. I am praying to God on a daily basis that what I have been shown is being shown to you, so you will prepare properly, and that we have a roadmap to the end. And I believe that God tells us all things before they happen. So I believe He has told us what is to come, and that someone on the planet does know if it is about to occur. And so prepare yourself in the next few months, and you'll see it coming because you've been paying attention. And I'm sorry the video went over 3 hours, but I think it's extremely important that I keep it all in one place. Show you these connections, show you how this all happens. Show you that as you see it, then you'll plant the seed, you'll tell other people, and you'll move the word forward. But when these elect are selected on the 7th seal, they will be impregnated with knowledge and truth, because they will go out and fight this Antichrist from this period forward. They will have the truth, not just anything, the truth of the word. Maybe not this truth that I'm showing you now, but it will be the truth. They will have the truth. And we are getting close to that period of time. God bless everybody. Find the open door. Find Jesus. Have a great night.